Hey there, tonight we're uncovering the story of the 1918 flu pandemic, where the truth is, it took more lives than World War I and reshaped an era in whispers rather than roars. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In the spring of 1918, as the world was gripped by the chaos of World War I, a silent enemy was gearing up for its own global tour. It started innocuously enough, like a bad opening act for the main show, in a military camp in Kansas. Yes, Kansas. Not exactly where you'd expect the villain of a worldwide pandemic to kick off, but history loves a good plot twist. Camp Funston, part of Fort Riley, was a bustling hub, brimming with soldiers being prepped for the European theaters. Here, the virus found its perfect breeding ground. Young, healthy men crammed together, sharing everything from bunks to influenza. Now, let's be clear, this wasn't just your average sniffle. The 1918 flu was like the rock star of viruses, amassing a fan base that nobody wanted. It didn't care for age, status, or borders. By the time it was done with its world tour, it had infected a staggering 1/3 of the global population, about 500 million people. We're talking numbers that make even modern pandemics look like a minor inconvenience. In the US alone, the first wave of the flu saw over 1,000 troops infected within a week at Camp Funston. The virus had no time for small talk. It was all business. As the soldiers shipped out to Europe, they unknowingly became the virus's roadies, spreading it across the Atlantic faster than you can say, health crisis. The flu's European debut was spectacularly disastrous, spreading through the trenches and camps with a speed that would make even the fastest courier service blush. The virus was relentless, showing no mercy to the troops already battered by war. It was almost as if it had a vendetta against the optimism of humanity, taking advantage of the global turmoil to establish its reign of terror. Despite this unfolding catastrophe, the initial reaction from world powers was, shall we say, less than enthusiastic. In fact, the powers that be were busy with the small matter of a world war, so a little flu seemed almost trivial in comparison. Besides, wartime censors were more focused on keeping morale high than on broadcasting bad news. Thus, many countries downplayed the outbreak. Spain, neutral during the war, was one of the few nations with a free press that reported extensively on the flu's spread, giving rise to the misnomer Spanish flu. Talk about bad PR. Yet the complacency didn't last long. As the virus hopped from continent to continent, it made its way into towns, cities, and villages, creating a global tapestry of illness. The flu was an equal opportunity affliction, sparing no corner of the earth. From the bustling streets of New York to the remote villages of the Arctic, its reach was seemingly limitless. This wasn't just a medical issue, it was a societal earthquake, shaking the foundations of everyday life across the globe. The numbers were staggering. In India, an estimated 12 to 17 million people died, which was about 5% of its population at the time. In the US, around 675,000 people died, a toll that overshadowed the American military casualties in the war. In the UK, the flu claimed 228,000 lives. It's safe to say that the virus earned its grim reputation as one of history's deadliest pandemics. The sheer scale of the impact is hard to fathom, even with the benefit of hindsight. The initial response, or lack thereof, from governments was a testament to human denial. With the war demanding every ounce of attention, the flu was often relegated to the back pages. It was a masterclass in how not to handle a pandemic. Public health measures were inconsistent, and many places took a wait-and-see approach. In the grand tradition of ignoring problems until they can no longer be ignored, the flu was given free rein to do its worst. The story of the 1918 flu pandemic is a sobering reminder of how interconnected the world truly is. It highlights the delicate balance between human progress and vulnerability. In an era when communication was limited and scientific understanding of viruses was in its infancy, the pandemic spread like wildfire. The world was globalized by war, and the flu took full advantage of this accidental infrastructure. It was a grim irony that the very movements intended to end one kind of death only accelerated another. Yet, in the midst of this chaos, there were moments of resilience and ingenuity. Communities banded together, often improvising solutions like makeshift hospitals and volunteer nursing services. These grassroots efforts were crucial in managing the crisis, even as official responses lagged. While the virus was an uninvited guest, it forced societies to confront their vulnerabilities and adapt in ways they had never imagined. As we look back on this historical chapter, it's tempting to shake our heads at the missteps and missed opportunities, but it's also worth acknowledging the lessons it offers. The 1918 flu pandemic was a brutal teacher, but it left behind a legacy of knowledge that would inform future generations. The world learned the hard way that pandemics don't respect borders, and that public health is a global responsibility, not a local inconvenience. So there you have it. The origins of the 1918 flu pandemic, a tale of human folly and viral tenacity. As we continue to unravel the complexities of this historical event, remember that history isn't just about dates and statistics. It's a living tapestry of stories, each thread a reminder of our shared humanity, and our shared propensity to overlook the obvious until it's too late. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the unfolding drama of this global saga. So, as we saunter deeper into the annals of the 1918 flu pandemic, let's cast our minds back to a time when the term medical science was often more of a hopeful suggestion than a reliable practice. Picture a world where the cutting edge of flu treatment might involve a generous splash of whiskey and a well-meaning prayer. This was the stage onto which the 1918 flu virus stumbled, and the scientists of the day were, to put it mildly, a tad unprepared. Now, it's crucial to understand that virology, the study of viruses, was still in its relative infancy during this period. The concept of a virus was about as clear as mud, with many experts still debating whether viruses were even a thing. It was like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle without knowing what the pieces looked like, or even if they existed. The scientific community was effectively playing guess who with a blindfold on. Back then, the reigning theory was that the flu was caused by bacteria, specifically a charming little fellow known as Haemophilus influenzae, or Pfeiffer's bacillus. This was based on the idea that if it looked like a duck and quacked like a duck, it was probably a duck. Unfortunately, the flu virus was more of a sneaky falcon in disguise, and this misidentification meant that efforts to curb the burgeoning pandemic were fundamentally misdirected. To add insult to injury, antibiotics, which could knock out bacterial infections faster than a heavyweight punch, were still a couple of decades away. So, what did doctors prescribe? Well, their toolkit included everything from mustard plasters and heart baths to bloodletting and enemas. It's safe to say that the medical advice of the day might have been better suited to a medieval barber surgeon's manual than to tackling a viral pandemic. Doctors were prescribing what they knew, which wasn't much, and hoping it would stick. And here's the kicker. Some treatments did stick, in the sense that people survived. But this was less due to medical prowess, and more because the human body is remarkably resilient. Meanwhile, the flu virus was running amok like a bull in a china shop, leaving a trail of destruction that was economically devastating. Businesses shut their doors as workers fell ill or were quarantined. Public gatherings were banned, schools closed, and the economy took a nosedive that would give any roller coaster a run for its money. In the United States, the economic impact was as brutal as it was swift. With an estimated 25% of the workforce bedridden, production lines ground to a halt. Cities like Philadelphia, which had been booming thanks to the war effort, suddenly found themselves grappling with empty streets and a paralyzed economy. Theaters, saloons, and even churches were closed in a desperate bid to contain the spread, an early precursor to our modern understanding of social distancing. Globally, the economic ripple effects were just as severe. In India, the flu exacerbated already dire conditions. The British colonial administration, stretched thin by the war, was ill-equipped to deal with the crisis, resulting in widespread famine and economic collapse. This was not merely a health crisis, but an economic earthquake, shaking the foundations of societies and economies worldwide. Now, you might be wondering, Where were the governments in all this chaos? Good question. In many places, they were doing their best impression of an ostrich with its head in the sand. The war was priority number 1, 2, and 3, and the flu was often viewed as an inconvenient sidebar. Public health systems were either non-existent or woefully inadequate, leaving communities to fend for themselves. It was a grim reminder that, in a crisis, the gap between the haves and the have-nots can widen to a chasm. Yet, amid this scientific and economic pandemonium, there were glimmers of hope and resilience. Communities banded together, with volunteers stepping up to provide care where official channels failed. Makeshift hospitals popped up like dandelions on a spring lawn, and ordinary citizens became frontline workers overnight. It was grassroots ingenuity at its finest, underscoring the human capacity for adaptation in the face of adversity. As we peel back the layers of this historical onion, it becomes clear that the 1918 flu pandemic was more than just a medical crisis. It was a societal stress test, exposing the fragility of systems that were thought to be robust. The virus didn't just attack bodies, it attacked the very fabric of society, forcing humanity to reckon with the limits of its knowledge and the consequences of its priorities. So here we stand, with the story far from over. The 1918 flu pandemic was a brutal teacher, leaving behind lessons in humility and resilience. The scientific community, galvanized by its failures, would eventually make leaps and bounds in understanding viruses, paving the way for future generations to tackle pandemics with a bit more confidence and a lot less guesswork. But those tales of triumph and tribulation are still to come, as we continue to unravel the complex web of history that the 1918 flu pandemic wove. Stay tuned, because the past still has plenty to teach us. But don't get too comfortable, because the story's about to take a turn for the worse. If the first wave of the 1918 flu was a polite knock at the door, the second wave was the SWAT team breaking it down. By late summer, the virus had mutated into a far deadlier form, and it wasn't taking prisoners. It started in Boston in September and rapidly spread like wildfire, showing up in places quicker than a gossip at a neighborhood barbecue. Now, here's the thing about the second wave. It was like the flu on steroids. The symptoms were more severe, and the death rates skyrocketed. People went from healthy to deathly ill in a matter of hours, with reports of patients turning blue and drowning in their own fluids. Not exactly a walk in the park. By October, this wave had turned into a tsunami, making the previous months look like a gentle tide by comparison. Governments worldwide were caught off guard again. It's hard to blame them entirely, given that their hands were already full with that little skirmish called World War I. But if there was ever a time for a synchronized global response, this was it. Instead, what we got was a patchwork quilt of measures, with some countries taking drastic actions and others doing their best ostrich impression, head thoroughly buried in the sand. Take the United States, for example. Some cities, like St. Louis, responded swiftly by closing schools, theaters, and churches, and banning public gatherings. These measures were stark but effective, and St. Louis managed to keep its death toll relatively low. Then there was Philadelphia, which took a different approach, one that involved throwing a massive parade attended by 200,000 people. Spoiler alert, it didn't end well. Within weeks, the city was reeling from one of the highest death rates in the country. It was a textbook example of what not to do in a pandemic, and a grim reminder that sometimes the greatest enemy is hubris. But it wasn't just the Americans struggling to find their footing. In Britain, the war effort took precedence, and the government was hesitant to impose measures that might disrupt morale or productivity. The result? High mortality rates and a public health system stretched to its limits. Meanwhile, in India, the colonial administration seemed to have forgotten the memo about caring for the populace, resulting in catastrophic fatalities. The flu claimed an estimated 5% of the Indian population, a staggering number that underscores the lethal efficiency of the virus. Despite these varied responses, there was one common thread tying these nations together: a distinct lack of communication and cooperation. The irony of a world ostensibly united in war yet divided in health was not lost on anyone. Each country was essentially left to its own devices, with public health policies resembling a game of whack-a-mole rather than a coordinated strategy. The pandemic laid bare the weaknesses of nationalistic approaches in a global crisis. a lesson that would echo through the corridors of history. Yet, in the midst of this chaos, a peculiar form of unity emerged. The flu didn't care about borders, class, or creed. It was an equal opportunity affliction. As it swept through communities, it created a shared experience of suffering and resilience. People banded together in their misery, finding solace in collective hardship. It was, in a twisted way, a great leveler, reminding humanity of its fundamental interconnectedness. Public health campaigns sprang up, with posters offering advice that now seems quaint and slightly bemusing. Coughs and sneezes spread diseases, became a common refrain, along with admonitions to cover your mouth and avoid crowds. The advice was solid, if a bit simplistic, given that germ theory was still a relatively new concept to the general public. But these efforts, however rudimentary, were crucial in educating the masses and slowing the spread of the virus. As we look back at these initiatives, it's tempting to chuckle at their simplicity. But let's not kid ourselves. Humanity hasn't exactly mastered the art of pandemic response in the ensuing century. Sure, our scientific understanding has come leaps and bounds, but the social and political challenges remain eerily familiar. The 1918 flu pandemic serves as a sobering reminder that while technology may advance, human nature tends to be a bit more stubborn in its evolution. So, as the second wave of the flu raged on, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake, societies were forced to adapt and survive. Communities became laboratories of innovation, with ordinary citizens stepping into roles they had never imagined. Nurses, doctors, and volunteers worked tirelessly, often at great personal risk, to care for the sick and dying. It was a testament to human resilience and the enduring spirit of solidarity in the face of overwhelming odds. Yet, as the world grappled with this apocalyptic scenario, questions began to arise. What had humanity really learned from this ordeal? How could societies better prepare for the future, ensuring that the lessons of the past were not forgotten? The answers were not immediately forthcoming, and in many ways, they are questions we continue to grapple with today. As we pause to consider these questions, we're left with a tantalizing sense of anticipation. The story of the 1918 flu pandemic is far from over, and the lessons it offers are as relevant now as they were over a century ago. So, as we continue to unravel this historical tapestry, remember that the past is not just a collection of dusty artifacts. It's a living narrative, full of insights and wisdom waiting to be discovered. Stay tuned, because the next chapter is just around the corner, and there's plenty more to uncover in this epic saga of human tenacity and viral audacity. It's fascinating, isn't it? How a tiny virus could wield such power, forcing mankind to rethink everything from public health to social norms. As the flu pandemic finally began to ebb in 1919, it left behind a world forever altered. To call it a mere blip in history would be like calling the Titanic a minor boating accident. The pandemic was a seismic event, and its aftershocks were felt long after the virus itself had retreated back into obscurity. First up, let's talk public health. Before 1918, public health policies were often more wishful thinking than effective strategy. But the pandemic was a wake-up call, a harsh reminder that germs don't bother with passports. In its aftermath, countries started to get serious about public health infrastructure. The US, for example, saw a push for the creation of the National Institutes of Health in 1930, a move that would have been unthinkable in the laissez-faire days of the early 20th century. Suddenly, the concept of a strategic national response didn't seem so radical. Globally, the League of Nations Health Organization was established in 1923, an early precursor to the World Health Organization. Their mission was straightforward: prevent another disaster like the 1918 flu. They focused on international cooperation, research, and a more systematic approach to disease tracking. It was like going from a rotary phone to a smartphone. Only instead of apps, they had epidemiologists. Now, let's dispel a little myth that the 1918 flu was all wrapped up with a neat bow by 1920. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. The virus lingered, popping up in waves through 1920 and beyond, though admittedly less deadly than before. The idea that it vanished as soon as the clock struck midnight on January 1, 1920 is more fiction than fact. It's a romantic notion, sure, But reality loves to spoil a good story. Now, about those long-term economic effects. The pandemic's immediate economic impact was like a financial gut punch. In the United States alone, it shaved an estimated $10 billion off the GDP, an eye-watering figure for the time. Industries from steel to textiles struggled to regain their footing, as a significant chunk of the workforce was either dead or incapacitated. But here's the twist. In the years that followed, the pandemic indirectly contributed to some unexpected economic progress. With so many men lost to the flu and WWI, women found new opportunities in the workforce. This wasn't just temporary wartime necessity. It was the beginning of a shift in gender roles. By 1920, women made up about 21% of the U.S. workforce, compared to just 18% in 1910. It was a subtle but significant step towards the gender equality movements that would gather steam in the decades to follow. Cultural shifts were just as pronounced. The Roaring Twenty, with its jazz and flappers, was partly a reaction to the grim years of war and disease. Society was ready to cut loose and embrace modernity with open arms, as if trying to dance away the shadows of the past. The pandemic had taught people the fragility of life, and they were determined to live it to the fullest. It wasn't all champagne and Charleston, though. The pandemic also left a legacy of mistrust in institutions, particularly in places where the official response was lackluster. Governments had been slow to react, and in many cases, communities were left to fend for themselves. This led to a surge in grassroots activism and self-reliance, as people realized they couldn't always rely on their leaders to have all the answers. It was a stark reminder of the limits of authority, a lesson that still resonates today. Medical research got a kick in the pants, too. The pandemic exposed the gaping holes in scientific knowledge about viruses. Scientists were determined not to be caught off guard again. In the years that followed, there was a renewed focus on virology and the development of vaccines. The groundwork laid during this period would eventually lead to the discovery of the influenza virus in the 1930 and the development of the first flu vaccine in the 1940. It was a slow burn, but the pandemic had set the wheels of scientific progress in motion. And let's not forget about the cultural myths that grew out of this period. The idea that the 1918 flu was somehow different from other pandemics, more romantic in its tragedy, is a narrative that persists. Yet, the reality was brutal and much less poetic. The flu didn't discriminate, didn't play favorites. It was an indiscriminate killer that left families shattered and communities in mourning. The romanticism likely stems from a collective need to find meaning in chaos, to weave a narrative that feels more manageable than the stark randomness of the truth. Despite its grimness, the pandemic was a catalyst for change, a painful but necessary evolution. It taught societies the importance of preparedness and the fatal cost of complacency. It showed that progress often comes from the darkest places, like a phoenix rising from the ashes. The flu pandemic of 1918 was more than just an event. It was a turning point that left an indelible mark on the 20th century. So, as we dwell on these changes and the myths that surround them, it's crucial to remember that history is both a mirror and a map. It reflects our past mistakes while guiding us toward a future that, hopefully, learns from them. The 1918 flu pandemic may have ended, but its lessons remain as pertinent as ever. Stay tuned, because this story has plenty more chapters yet to unfold. And speaking of chapters yet to unfold, let's dive into the uncanny parallels between the 1918 flu pandemic and modern health crises. If you've been thinking that the world's approach to pandemics has evolved into a sleek, well-oiled machine, well, hold onto your hats, because history has a few surprises up its sleeve. Fast forward to the 21st century, and you'd think we'd be pandemic pros by now. But if the COVID-19 pandemic taught us anything, it's that humanity still struggles with the same fundamental issues. The tug-of-war between individual freedoms and collective responsibility, the pitfalls of misinformation, and the challenges of coordinating a global response. It's almost like we've been handed the same script, but somehow we keep fumbling the lines. Take communication, for instance. In 1918, wartime censorship meant that the flu spread faster than information. Fast forward to today, and we're drowning in data, Yet somehow misinformation floats to the top like cream on a cappuccino. Back then, the myth of the Spanish flu took root because Spain had the audacity to report honestly. Today, we face a barrage of myths, from miracle cures to conspiracy theories. It's like playing whack-a-mole, but the moles have PhDs in viral marketing. Then, there's the matter of public health infrastructure. The post-1918 world saw a surge in public health initiatives, but the COVID-19 pandemic revealed cracks in the system that were as wide as ever. Despite advances in science and medicine, many countries were caught flat-footed. It turns out that having the science is one thing, implementing it effectively is another. It's a bit like owning a top-of-the-line gym membership, but never actually going to the gym. Economically, both pandemics delivered gut punches that would make a heavyweight champ wince. The 1918 pandemic shaved $10 billion off the US GDP, and COVID-19. It's estimated to have cost the global economy a staggering $28 trillion. But here's the twist. Both crises also acted as catalysts for change. The 1918 flu indirectly spurred women's participation in the workforce, while COVID-19 accelerated trends like remote work and digital transformation. It's the economic version of turning lemons into lemonade if the lemons were giant, economy-wrecking boulders. Politically, the echoes are just as loud. In 1918, the lack of a coordinated response was glaring, and the same could be said for the early days of COVID-19. International cooperation was more of a suggestion than a reality, with countries scrambling to secure their own supplies like sharpers on Black Friday. It's a stark reminder that, despite our interconnected world, nationalism often takes the front seat in a crisis. Yet, amid these sobering similarities, there's one lesson that remains as stubbornly optimistic as a sunflower in a storm: the resilience of the human spirit. In both 1918 and today, ordinary people have shown extraordinary courage and adaptability. Makeshift hospitals in church basements have their modern counterparts in pop-up testing sites and drive-through vaccination centers. Volunteers and healthcare workers continue to be the unsung heroes, proving that while systems may falter, humanity's heart beats stronger than ever. And let's not forget the scientific leaps. The 1918 pandemic spurred advancements in virology and vaccines, while the COVID-19 crisis saw the rapid development of mRNA vaccines, a scientific feat that would have seemed like science fiction just a few years ago. It's a testament to how adversity can fuel innovation, turning the darkest hours into the brightest breakthroughs. As we wrap up this historical tour, it's worth pondering what history can truly teach us. Spoiler alert. It's about as predictable as a cat on catnip. History doesn't offer neat solutions or clear answers. Instead, it provides a mirror, reflecting both our triumphs and our follies. It's a guide, albeit a cryptic one, urging us to learn not just from what went wrong, but from what went right. It's about understanding that progress is less a straight line and more a roller coaster with unexpected twists and turns. In the end, the legacy of the 1918 flu pandemic, and indeed any pandemic, is a story of human tenacity. It's a reminder that while viruses may be indifferent, humanity is anything but. We adapt, we innovate, and we push forward, armed with the knowledge that while history may not repeat itself, it certainly rhymes. As we look to the future, let's carry these lessons with us, tempered by the humility of the past and the hope for a better tomorrow. And there you have it. From the trenches of World War I to the digital age, the tale of the 1918 flu pandemic is one of enduring relevance. It's a saga of science and society, of mistakes made and lessons learned. So as you drift off to sleep with this newfound knowledge, remember, history is not just a series of events. It's the ongoing story of us all. In the buzzing heart of the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople wasn't just a city. It was a fortress with an attitude. And nothing screamed, "Don't mess with us," like its formidable Theodosian walls. Picture 14 miles of stone that might as well have had a neon sign proclaiming, "Good luck getting in here." These walls weren't just about keeping the unwelcome out. They were a testament to the empire's bold confidence and their constant paranoia about who might turn up unannounced, like a medieval version of unwanted relatives during the holidays. The Theodosian walls were the brainchild of Emperor Theodosius Roman II, who, in the early 5th century, decided that the best way to ensure a good night's sleep in Byzantium was to encase the city in a triple-layered hug of limestone and brick. These layers included a moat, a terrace, and 2 towering walls, with the outer one standing a modest 27 feet and the inner wall hitting a skyscraper-worthy 40 feet. Talk about overachieving in the defense department. Now, let's talk numbers, because what's more fun than a little math with your history? Keeping these walls standing was no small feat. It cost around 1,000 gold solidi annually. For those not fluent in ancient currency, that's equivalent to the GDP of a small kingdom, or, in modern terms, the price of a modest-sized island in the Caribbean. The Byzantines didn't just throw money at the problem, though. They also invested in a maintenance crew that would give any modern-day roadworks team a run for its money. These folks were responsible for ensuring that every stone was in place and every crack was patched, proving that even back then, infrastructure was a never-ending headache. This massive investment wasn't just about safety. It was also an impressive piece of Byzantine PR. In an age when news traveled at the speed of a donkey cart, word of these walls spread far and wide. They became a symbol of the empire's might, a medieval marketing campaign that said, "We're not just surviving, we're thriving." Sure, sometimes it was more bluster than reality, but isn't that the cornerstone of any good PR strategy? Of course, no story about ancient architecture is complete without a little myth-busting. While the walls were indeed a marvel of engineering, they weren't invincible. Over the centuries, they faced numerous sieges, each one testing their limits. Yet somehow, the Theodosian walls managed to hold firm against the likes of Attila the Hun and several Persian kings, who probably left with a serious case of stone envy. However, in 1204, during the Fourth Crusade, the walls finally met their match, not because they weren't up to snuff, but due to some rather enthusiastic Venetian sailors who decided to turn their boats into impromptu bridges. Talk about thinking outside the box, or in this case, the wall. Beyond the stone and mortar, the walls symbolized the Byzantine way of life, a blend of strategic cunning, economic prowess, and a bit of chutzpah. They were a daily reminder to the inhabitants of Constantinople that they lived in the epicenter of a world teetering between chaos and order. For the average citizen, these walls were both a security blanket and a status symbol. Within them, life thrived with bustling markets, religious fervor, and political intrigue, each competing for attention like medieval reality TV. And let's not forget the labor force, those unsung heroes who kept the walls from becoming just another ancient ruin. These workers, many of whom were conscripted from the local population, faced the Sisyphean task of repairing damage from natural disasters and human hubris alike. Their work was often thankless, but essential, a testament to the empire's underlying strength, even when its leaders were more interested in palace politics than practicalities. In the end, the Theodosian walls were much more than just a defense mechanism. They were a statement. They represented the Byzantine Empire's resilience, its ability to adapt and endure in a world that was constantly trying to knock it down. They were a reminder that sometimes the best offense is a really, really good defense, preferably one that can withstand a battering ram or two. While the Theodosian walls were busy doing their best impression of a medieval security system, life inside Constantinople was anything but a quiet retreat behind stone. The city was a bustling metropolis, a swirling mix of cultures, religions, and economies that made it the medieval version of a global hotspot. If you could teleport back to the 10th century and land in Constantinople, you'd find yourself smack dab in the heart of a vibrant urban sprawl that was as dizzying as it was diverse. The Forum of Constantine was the epicenter of this economic whirlwind, a place that would make today's Wall Street look like a quaint farmer's market. Think of it as ancient Amazon. Calm, but with a lot more haggling and a bit less two-day shipping. This was the place where merchants from as far away as the Silk Road and the Mediterranean converged, creating a kaleidoscope of goods that ranged from exotic spices to luxurious silks. The Forum wasn't just about buying and selling, though. It was a social hub where news, gossip, and the occasional scandal were exchanged as freely as the coins that changed hands. Speaking of coins, let's talk about money, because who doesn't love a good discussion about ancient currency? The Byzantine economy was a well-oiled machine, with the solidus, a gold coin weighing in at about 5 grams, serving as the backbone. This little piece of bling wasn't just currency, it was a statement of power and stability. It was the in gold we trust of its time, accepted from the bazaars of Baghdad to the markets of Venice. But of course, no currency system is complete without the occasional hiccup. Inflation was as bothersome then as it is now, with prices sometimes fluctuating like a Byzantine emperor's mood swings. Now, if you're wondering how much that Salidus could get you in the markets of Constantinople, let's break it down. A loaf of bread, the staple of any self-respecting Byzantine diet, could set you back about a handful of nummy, the bronze coins that jingled in the pockets of everyday citizens. But don't let the simplicity of bread fool you. This was a world where food prices were as volatile as the political climate, sometimes leaving the less fortunate to tighten their belts, literally. The strategic location of Constantinople was the city's ace up its sleeve, medieval equivalent of owning prime real estate in Times Square. Nestled between Europe and Asia, it was the bridge between the East and West, a position that guaranteed a steady stream of commerce and an equally steady flow of cultural exchange. This wasn't just geographic luck. It was a calculated move by Constantine the Great, who, in 330 AD, decided to plant his imperial flag here, effectively making the city the new Rome. And let's face it, when your backyard is the Bosporus Strait, you're bound to attract some attention. The population of Constantinople was as diverse as its markets, a melting pot of ethnicities and religions that would make any modern multicultural city blush. Greeks, Armenians, Jews, Slavs, and a myriad of others coexisted, each adding their own flavor to the city's rich tapestry. This diversity was both a strength and a challenge, creating a vibrant cultural mosaic, while occasionally sparking tensions that simmered just beneath the surface. Despite the city's prosperous facade, life wasn't all opulence and luxury. The bustling streets were a testament to the disparity that existed between the haves and the have-nots. While the wealthy paraded in their silk robes and gold jewelry, the poorer citizens scraped by, their lives governed by the whims of the market and the occasional outbreak of plague. Yet, in this chaotic blend of wealth and poverty, the people of Constantinople found a way to thrive, their resilience as strong as the walls that protected them. The markets were more than just a place of commerce. They were the lifeblood of the city, a barometer of its health and wealth. They reflected the intricate dance of supply and demand, a dance that sometimes ended with empty shelves and hungry mouths. Yet, even in the face of scarcity, the people of Constantinople displayed a remarkable tenacity, adapting to the ebb and flow of fortune with a pragmatism that was as Byzantine as the empire itself. So, while the walls of Constantinople stood as a testament to the might and majesty of the Byzantine Empire, the true heart of the city lay in its markets and its people. This was a place where the past and present collided, where history was written in the everyday transactions of merchants and the whispered conversations of citizens. Constantinople was more than just a city. It was a living, breathing organism, a testament to the enduring spirit of those who called it home. As we move forward, the saga of Constantinople continues to unfurl, each chapter richer and more complex than the last. From its booming markets to its strategic prowess, the city remains a fascinating study of contrasts, a place where wealth and poverty, power and vulnerability coexist in an ever-shifting dance. The story of Constantinople is far from over, and as we delve deeper into its labyrinthine streets, we uncover tales that are as compelling today as they were 1,000 years ago. As we continue our journey through Constantinople, the city's political landscape was as intricate as the mosaic floors of the Hagia Sophia. This wasn't just any city. It was the Byzantine Empire's nerve center, where emperors wielded power like a chef with a cleaver, sometimes with precision, often with chaos. The Byzantine court was a hotbed for intrigue, where ambition frequently danced with folly, and plots were as common as the city's iconic domes. Let's dive into the Nika riots of 532 AD, which were less a riot and more an explosive cocktail of political discontent, social unrest, and sporting fervor gone very wrong. At the heart of it all was Emperor Justinian I, a ruler whose reign was marked by ambition and a penchant for grandiose projects. Think of him as the Steve Jobs of the Byzantine Empire, always pushing for the next big thing. Justinian envisioned a revitalized Rome under his reign, But the road to glory was paved with a few too many missteps and public relations disasters. The Nika riots kicked off not in the corridors of power, but in the Hippodrome, the beating heart of Constantinople's social life. Imagine a medieval version of the Super Bowl, but with more chariots and fewer commercials. The Hippodrome was where allegiances were forged and rivalries ignited, with the blue and green factions, essentially political parties masquerading as sports teams, leading the charge. These weren't just casual fan clubs. They were powerful networks with the muscle to challenge the emperor himself. In January 532, tensions boiled over during a chariot race when a dispute between the blues and the greens erupted into full-blown chaos. The crowd, already irked by Justinian's heavy taxation and perceived favoritism, united under the battle cry Nika, meaning conquer, and took to the streets. What followed was 6 days of mayhem that saw half the city torched, including the original Hagia Sophia, and thousands of people killed. Talk about a bad day at the races. Faced with a city on the brink of collapse, Justinian initially considered fleeing, but it was his formidable wife, Empress Theodora, who famously declared, "Purple is a good color for a shroud," refusing to abandon the throne. With her steely resolve and a bit of strategic bribery, the emperor managed to regain control, culminating in a brutal crackdown that left tens of thousands dead. The city was left smoldering, but Justinian's grip on power remained unshaken, albeit at a staggering human cost. Now, let's take a closer look at Justinian's legacy, which is as layered as a Byzantine fresco. He was a master of spin, adept at turning disasters into triumphs, or at least trying to. His reign is often remembered for the construction of the Hagia Sophia, the architectural wonder that rose like a phoenix from the ashes of the riots. This wasn't just a church. It was a statement, a colossal in your face, to anyone who doubted the empire's resilience. Built in just over 5 years, this marvel of engineering boasted a dome that seemed to defy gravity, a symbol of divine favor and imperial power. But Justinian's ambitions extended beyond bricks and mortar. He sought to restore the Roman Empire's former glory, embarking on costly military campaigns that stretched the empire's resources to the brink. Under the capable leadership of his general, Belisarius, the Byzantines reclaimed significant territories in North Africa and Italy. Yet these conquests came at a steep price, draining the imperial treasury faster than you can say Byzantine bureaucracy. Speaking of bureaucracy, Justinian was nothing if not thorough. His legal reforms, encapsulated in the Corpus Juris Civilis, codified Roman law and laid the groundwork for modern legal systems. It was a monumental task, akin to organizing the world's messiest library, but it provided a semblance of order in a world teetering on chaos. This was Justinian's true legacy, a legal framework that outlasted the empire itself, influencing countless generations. Yet, for all his achievements, Justinian was not universally adored. His reign was marked by heavy taxation and a relentless pursuit of control, leading some to view him as a tyrant. The historian Procopius, in his Secret History, painted a less than flattering portrait of the emperor, depicting him as a ruthless despot, and his wife Theodora as a manipulative force behind the throne. Whether these accounts were factual or mere character assassination remains a topic of debate, but they certainly add spice to the narrative. Beyond the palace intrigue and military exploits, what did daily governance look like in Constantinople? The Byzantine administration was a complex web of officials, each with a finger in the imperial pie. From the powerful eparch, who managed the city's day-to-day affairs, to the countless bureaucrats who ensured the empire's smooth operation, it was a system designed to maintain order while perpetuating the emperor's authority. The city's economic engine was fueled by trade, taxes, and occasionally the emperor's whims. Taxation was an art form in Byzantium, with levies on land, trade, and even the use of public services. This system ensured a steady flow of revenue, but also bred resentment among the populace, who often saw their hard-earned coins vanishing into the imperial coffers. While Justinian and his successors painted themselves as benevolent rulers, the reality was often more nuanced. Governance in Constantinople was a delicate balancing act, a game of geopolitical chess played out against a backdrop of shifting allegiances and external threats. The Byzantine emperors were adept at navigating this treacherous terrain, employing diplomacy and strategic marriages to secure alliances and stave off invasions. As we unravel the layers of Constantinople's political history, it's clear that the city was more than just a seat of power. It was a crucible where ambition and reality collided. The emperors, with their grand visions and all-too-human flaws, left an indelible mark on history, their legacies echoing through the ages. Yet, for all their triumphs and tribulations, the true strength of Constantinople lay in its people, the resilient citizens who weathered the storms of history with a tenacity that was as enduring as the city itself. And so, the saga of Constantinople continues, a rich tapestry woven from the threads of ambition, power, and survival. As we delve deeper into this captivating tale, we uncover the stories that shaped a city and an empire, each chapter more intriguing than the last. Stay tuned as we explore the next phase of this epic journey, where the echoes of the past continue to resonate in the present. And as we tiptoe into the spiritual corridors of Constantinople, let's just say the city's religious life was anything but dull. The Byzantine emperors, true to form, wielded religion like a Swiss army knife, one tool among many to bolster their rule, inspire the masses, and occasionally settle scores with their rivals. But was it all about divine inspiration, or just a medieval chess game with a gilded cross as the king? To grasp the full picture, let's start with the magnificent Hagia Sophia, a structure so awe-inducing that it could make even the staunchest atheist reconsider their life choices. Commissioned by Emperor Justinian I, this architectural marvel stood as the crown jewel of Byzantine religious life. Finished in 537 AD, it took a mere 5 years to complete, a feat that would put most modern construction projects to shame. Its massive dome, spanning 31 meters, seemed to float as if suspended by divine will, a heavenly canopy over the faithful below. But don't let the serene beauty fool you. The Hagia Sophia was as much a political statement as a house of worship. It declared Justinian's power and piety in equal measure, a resounding, "I'm still standing," after the tumultuous Nika riots. When it came to building projects, Justinian wasn't just playing the long game. He was setting the empire's skyline. Yet, the spiritual life in Constantinople was as complex as Byzantine politics. The Hagia Sophia was the stage for grand religious ceremonies, where emperors and patriarchs mingled in a delicate dance of power and faith. These events were more than mere rituals. They were public spectacles, replete with incense, chants, and a healthy dose of political theater. In the Byzantine Empire, the line between church and state was blurrier than a foggy morning on the Bosporus. Religion in Constantinople wasn't just about grand gestures and architectural marvels, though. It trickled down to the everyday lives of its citizens, from the bustling markets to the quiet corners of the cities, many chapels. Daily rituals like morning prayers and feast days punctuated the Byzantine calendar, offering moments of reflection and community in a city that was constantly on the move. But of course, nothing in Byzantium was simple or straightforward, particularly not religion. Theological debates were as common as chariot races, and they could get just as heated. The city was a melting pot of ideas, where doctrinal disagreements could erupt into full-blown controversies faster than you can say ecumenical council. Take, for instance, the iconoclastic controversy. It was less a debate and more of a century-long slugfest over the use of religious images. The dispute kicked off in 726 AD, when Emperor Leo Roman III decided that icons were a bit too close to idolatry for comfort. His decree to remove and destroy these religious images didn't just ruffle feathers, it plucked the whole bird. The conflict split not only the church but families and communities as well, leading to a period of iconoclasm that saw sacred art smashed and religious fervor ignited. This wasn't just a theological debate, it was a power struggle, with emperors and church leaders jockeying for influence. In 843 AD, the veneration of icons was restored, a victory for the iconophiles that was celebrated with the Feast of Orthodoxy, because nothing says reconciliation like a good old-fashioned feast. And then there were the ecumenical councils, those grand assemblies where bishops from across the empire gathered to hammer out the finer points of doctrine. They were the theological equivalent of a board meeting, but with more robes and fewer PowerPoint presentations. The Council of Chalcedon in 451 AD, for instance, was a critical moment in church history, defining the nature of Christ in a decision that still echoes through Christianity today. But let's not sugarcoat it. These councils weren't always about divine enlightenment. They were often arenas for political maneuvering, where theological disagreements masked deeper power struggles. It's safe to say that the debates were as Byzantine as the empire itself, full of intrigue and not a little drama. The schisms and councils were a testament to the city's role as a religious powerhouse, yet they also highlighted the constant tension between unity and division in the empire. The Byzantine Church wasn't just a spiritual institution. It was a formidable political entity, intertwined with the very fabric of imperial rule. And speaking of politics, let's not forget the Patriarch of Constantinople, arguably the second most powerful man in the empire after the emperor himself. This wasn't just a religious leader. The Patriarch wielded significant influence over both church and state. It was a position that came with a lot of perks, but also a fair share of headaches, navigating the turbulent waters of Byzantine politics. The Patriarch's role was akin to walking a tightrope, balancing the spiritual needs of the flock with the demands of the imperial court. It was a job that required diplomacy, theological acumen, and a good bit of patience, especially when dealing with emperors who often had their own ideas about religious doctrine. Yet, for all the politics and power plays, religion in Constantinople was also a deeply personal affair. The city was home to countless monasteries and hermitages, places where individuals sought solace and spiritual growth away from the hustle and bustle of urban life. These monastic communities were centers of learning and piety, preserving knowledge and nurturing spiritual seekers in their quest for divine truth. The monks and nuns of Constantinople were not just religious devotees. They were integral parts of the city's social fabric. They offered charity, education, and medical care, serving as pillars of support in a society where the line between the sacred and the secular was delightfully blurred. So, was it all divine inspiration or a medieval power game in disguise? Well, as with most things Byzantine, the answer is a cocktail of both. Religion in Constantinople was a multifaceted beast, a source of unity and division, inspiration and manipulation. It was a force that shaped the city and its people in profound ways, leaving an indelible mark on the history of the Byzantine Empire. As we continue our exploration of this complex and captivating city, we'll delve deeper into the forces that shaped its destiny, uncovering stories that are as intriguing today as they were centuries ago. The spiritual saga of Constantinople is far from over, with echoes that resonate in the present. Stay tuned for more tales from this vibrant metropolis, where history and legend intertwine in the most fascinating of ways. As Constantinople's rich tapestry of spiritual and political intrigue unfurls, we find ourselves at the precipice of its most dramatic chapter, the fall of the city in 1453. It's a tale of ambition, technology, and a fair share of historical irony, culminating in the day when maimed Roman II cannons did what a millennium of sieges could not: bring down the indomitable Theodosian walls. But let's not jump the gun, or in this case, the cannonball. By the 15th century, the Byzantine Empire was a shadow of its former self, more of a city-state with imperial delusions than a sprawling empire. Constantinople, once the bustling heart of a vast dominion, was now hemmed in by the rising power of the Ottomans. City's population had dwindled from 500,000 in its prime to around 50,000, a tenth of its former glory. Picture a grand ship reduced to a lifeboat, adrift in a sea of geopolitical change. Economically, things weren't much rosier. The empire's coffers, once jingling with the gold solidi that made traders' eyes twinkle, were now more echo chamber than treasure chest. Debts stacked higher than the Hagia Sophia's dome plagued the Byzantine rulers, who were left scraping the bottom of the barrel to maintain a semblance of their former might. Trade routes had shifted, bypassing Constantinople and leaving the city's markets a ghostly echo of their former selves. Enter maimed Roman II, the young and ambitious Ottoman Sultan with a serious case of empire envy. At just 21, he was determined to make a name for himself by doing what had been deemed impossible: conquering Constantinople, armed with a massive army of 80,000 and a fleet that would give Poseidon pause. Maimed set his sights on the city like a kid eyeing a candy store. But Maimed wasn't just bringing swords and arrows to this medieval showdown. He had the latest in military tech, cannons. And not just any cannons, but the massive bombard designed by the Hungarian engineer Urban. Imagine the surprise of the Byzantines when they saw these behemoths capable of hurling 600-pound stone balls clear over their beloved walls. It was like bringing a bazooka to a knife fight. So, was the fall of Constantinople inevitable, or could the Byzantines have pulled a last-minute rabbit out of their imperial hat? Well, let's look at the facts. The Byzantine defenders, numbering around 7,000, were outmanned and outgunned. The city's walls, though still impressive, were no match for the relentless pounding of cannon fire. And while the Byzantines did manage some clever defenses and fierce resistance, the odds were stacked higher than the city's fabled towers. The final blow came on May 29, 1453, when the Ottomans breached the walls after a 53-day siege. The city that had withstood over 1,000 years of attacks, from Persians to Crusaders, finally fell, not to the might of a rival empire, but to the relentless march of technology and time. Maimed entered the city in triumph, granting it a brief respite from pillage in a nod to its storied past. Constantinople's fall marked the end of the Byzantine Empire, but its legacy is anything but forgotten. The city, now Istanbul, became the heart of the Ottoman Empire, a vibrant metropolis where East met West. The Hagia Sophia, once the jewel of Christian architecture, was converted into a mosque, its soaring dome now echoing with the calls of the muezzin rather than the chants of Byzantine priests. Yet, for all its grandeur and tragedy, Constantinople's story is a cautionary tale of hubris and decline. It's a reminder that even the most impregnable fortress can crumble under the weight of innovation and neglect. The city that once stood as the pinnacle of civilization became a testament to the impermanence of power, a relic of glory faded. But let's not leave it on such a somber note. Constantinople's legacy is also one of resilience and cultural fusion. Its strategic location ensured a blend of influences that shaped the world in profound ways, from the preservation of classical knowledge during the Dark Ages to the rich tapestry of art and architecture that inspired Renaissance Europe. Constantinople's impact resonates through history. So, was the fall of Constantinople a tragedy or an inevitability? Perhaps it was both. A city that once gleamed as a beacon of human achievement found itself outpaced by the relentless march of time and technology. Yet, in its fall, Constantinople laid the groundwork for new beginnings, its legacy a reminder that even in decline, there can be rebirth. As the sun set on May 29, 1453, a new chapter began, not just for the city, but for the world. And while the walls that once stood for a millennium finally crumbled, the spirit of Constantinople endures, echoing through the corridors of history like a timeless melody, both haunting and beautiful. Before Abraham Lincoln became the stovepipe-hatted icon of American history, he was just a lanky kid from the backwoods of Kentucky, where the only thing taller than the trees was his ambition. Born in a one-room log cabin in 1809, young Abe was the kind of kid who could make even a frontier lifestyle look glamorous. If by glamorous, you mean reading by the dim glow of a fireplace, because there was no electricity like ever. His father, Thomas Lincoln, wasn't exactly the Bill Gates of the early 19th century. Nope, Thomas was a subsistence farmer, which is a fancy way of saying he was dirt poor and worked with actual dirt. Abe's education was as patchy as a quilt made by someone with attention deficit disorder. He had about a year of formal schooling, give or take a few months. But here's the twist. Abe was a voracious reader, devouring anything he could get his hands on, from the Bible to Shakespeare. That was his secret weapon. Books were his version of tick-tock, a way to escape the humdrum life of splitting logs and plowing fields. It said he would walk miles, barefoot through snow, to borrow a book. That's dedication. No Uber, no Amazon Prime, just sheer willpower and frostbite. Now, let's talk about Lincoln's early career, which was a mixed bag of odd jobs and near misses. He tried his hand at being a flatboatman, ferrying goods down the Mississippi River. Imagine Huck Finn, but taller and with even less of a life plan. Later, he attempted to run a general store in New Salem, Illinois. Spoiler alert, it was a disaster. He ended up with a mountain of debt so high it could rival the Rockies, something he humorously referred to as the national debt of New Salem. But here's where things get interesting. Lincoln had a quirky side that made him both memorable and endearing. For one, he was a wrestler, a fact that might surprise anyone who thinks of him as just the guy on the penny. Standing at an impressive 6'4", with limbs that seemed to have forgotten when to stop growing, he was a formidable opponent in the ring. He reportedly had 300 matches under his belt and lost only once. This was back when wrestling was more about grappling in the mud than hitting someone with a folding chair, mind you. And let's not forget Lincoln's social skills, or lack thereof. He wasn't exactly the life of the party, often coming off as awkward and gawky, like a teenage giraffe at a high school prom. Yet this awkwardness had a charm all its own. He could spin a good yarn, often using humor and folksy wisdom to win people over. One of his favorite lines was, "Better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak out and remove all doubt." Classic Abe. Now, you might think Lincoln's rise to political prominence was a straight shot to the top. Not quite. His early political career was a series of ups and downs, with more false starts than a broken-down Model T. He first ran for the Illinois state legislature in 1832 and lost. But he wasn't one to wallow in defeat. He tried again in 1834 and won, largely because he had the kind of persistence that would make a honey badger look lazy. Lincoln spent 8 years in the Illinois legislature, where he honed his skills in debate and lawmaking. He developed his political ideology during this time, especially his opposition to slavery's expansion. But let's be real. Lincoln wasn't some overnight sensation. He worked hard, often failing spectacularly, like when he ran for the U.S. Senate in 1854 and lost, and again in 1858. If nothing else, he could teach a master class in resilience. What really set Lincoln apart was his ability to connect with ordinary Americans. Despite his oddball ways and penchant for self-deprecating humor, people saw a bit of themselves in him. He was relatable because he wasn't perfect. He was just a guy who stumbled, got back up, and kept going. That's what made his eventual political ascent so remarkable. He wasn't a polished aristocrat. He was a rough-hewn log splitter who climbed his way up the political ladder, rung by wobbly rung. By the time Lincoln became the 16th President of the United States, he was well acquainted with failure, which was perhaps his greatest asset. He knew the value of perseverance and hard work, traits that would become crucial during his presidency. But that's another story for another time. For now, let's remember the young Lincoln, the wrestling, book-loving, socially awkward dreamer who was just trying to make sense of a world that was as unforgiving as the frontier itself. So, let's pick up where we left off, with Lincoln being a guy who seemed to collect failures like some people collect stamps. But here's the twist. Each setback only sharpened his resolve. By the time the 1850s rolled around, Lincoln was like that underdog boxer who just kept getting back in the ring. The political landscape was shifting faster than a cat on a hot tin roof, and Lincoln had to keep his wits about him to navigate it. Now, let's talk about Lincoln's evolving views on slavery, which were about as straightforward as a plate of spaghetti. While he was never a fan of slavery, who would be, really, unless you're a cartoon villain, he wasn't exactly shouting from the rooftops for its immediate abolition either. Lincoln's position was more nuanced, like a jazz musician improvising on a theme. He opposed the spread of slavery into the new territories, but wasn't calling for its outright abolition in states where it already existed. This was a tightrope walk between moral conviction and political pragmatism, and Lincoln was Philippe Petit with a stovepipe hat. The 1850 were a turbulent decade for the United States, and Lincoln was right in the thick of it. Picture this. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, which allowed territories to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery, was like dropping a lit match into a barrel of gunpowder. It effectively overturned the Missouri Compromise and opened up a can of worms that even Pandora would have been wary of. This act was the political equivalent of tossing a hand grenade into a crowded room and then leaving the building. Enter the Lincoln-Douglas debates of 1858. Cue the dramatic music. These were a series of 7 debates with Stephen A. Douglas, the little giant, a man whose political stature was inversely proportional to his physical height. Douglas was the incumbent senator, a master of rhetoric, and a proponent of popular sovereignty, which sounds like a good thing until you realize it meant letting people vote on whether or not they should own other people. These debates were like the Super Bowl of political discourse, drawing crowds in the thousands. Picture Lincoln, towering over Douglas like an awkward, gangly tree, delivering his arguments with a mix of logic, humor, and that folksy charm that made you feel like he was your wise, if slightly eccentric, uncle. Lincoln famously declared, "A house divided against itself cannot stand," a line that would become as iconic as the man himself. It was a mic drop moment before microphones were even a thing. Lincoln lost that Senate race, but he won something far more valuable: national recognition. He became the unlikely poster child for a newfangled political party called the Republicans, which wasn't quite the powerhouse it is today. It was more like a scrappy upstart trying to make its mark on the political scene, and Lincoln was its unlikely hero. He had the charisma of a rock star, if rock stars wore top hats and told homespun stories instead of shredding guitar solos. And speaking of charisma, let's not forget Lincoln's strategic use of self-deprecating humor. When people accused him of being two-faced, he quipped, "If I were two-faced, would I be wearing this one?" This was a guy who could laugh at himself, and in doing so, disarm his critics. It was like he had a verbal judo move that turned insults into punchlines. Uniting the Republican Party in the 1850 was no small feat. It was a bit like herding cats, if those cats had deeply entrenched political ideologies and a penchant for heated debate. Lincoln had to navigate between radical abolitionists who wanted slavery abolished yesterday and more conservative elements who were just trying to keep the Union together. He managed to balance these disparate interests with the finesse of a tightrope walker straddling a political chasm. By the time the 1860 presidential election rolled around, Lincoln was ready. He snagged the Republican nomination, thanks in part to his reputation as a moderate who could appeal to both sides of the aisle. His opponents underestimated him at their peril. Lincoln, with his homespun wisdom and undeniable tenacity, was the political equivalent of a slow-cooked stew, rich, complex, and worth the wait. And so, as the dust settled on the 1850s, Lincoln was poised on the brink of the presidency. The nation was a tinderbox of tension, and Lincoln was about to take on the challenge of a lifetime. But that's a story for the next chapter. For now, remember this: Lincoln was a master of navigating political minefields, a man who turned every setback into a stepping stone. He was poised to become a leader who would redefine what it meant to be an American, even if he did it one awkward, endearing step at a time. As Lincoln sauntered into the White House in 1861, his lanky frame probably felt the weight of the Union's impending collapse more than any stovepipe hat could ever balance. This was no simple presidential inauguration. It was like stepping into a circus tent just as the lions decide to stage a rebellion. The country was on the brink of the Civil War, and Abe was the ringmaster handed a flaming baton. Here's where the legend of Lincoln the leader truly begins, and let me tell you, it's anything but a bedtime story. First things first, let's talk about Lincoln's leadership style, often described as unorthodox, which is a nice way of saying he didn't follow the rulebook because he was too busy riding his own. His cabinet, affectionately dubbed the Team of Rivals, wasn't just a catchy name, it was a political madhouse. Imagine a group of fiercely ambitious men, each with egos the size of Texas, and Lincoln at the helm, trying to steer the ship without it capsizing in a sea of conflicting opinions. The cabinet was a who's who of political adversaries, featuring the likes of William H. Seward, Lincoln's Secretary of State and former rival for the Republican nomination. Seward initially thought he'd be the real power behind the throne, only to find out Lincoln wasn't just a puppet with a penchant for folksy anecdotes. Lincoln's unorthodox approach meant he listened more than he spoke, a rare trait in politics then and now. He'd absorb every opinion like a sponge, then wring out a decision that left most people nodding, even if reluctantly. It was like watching a master chess player decide between rook and knight, but in Lincoln's case, the pieces were people, and the stakes were the country's future. He was like the original doctor, Phil, if doctor. Phil had to deal with the threat of national disintegration instead of bickering couples. And then, of course, there was the Emancipation Proclamation. Ah yes, the document that would forever change the trajectory of the United States. But before we all start singing Battle Hymn of the Republic, let's get one thing straight. Lincoln's path to issuing the proclamation was less about a sudden epiphany and more about strategic timing. It wasn't that he woke up one morning, looked in the mirror and said, "Today's the day I free the slaves." No, Lincoln was a political tactician. He knew that to preserve the Union he had to play his cards right, even if those cards were as controversial as pineapple on pizza. Here's the economic reality. The southern states, with their economy tied to slavery like a ball and chain, weren't going to give up without a fight. Cotton was king, and the Confederacy was banking on it. Literally, Lincoln had to factor in everything from European intervention to northern public opinion before making his move. It was a political chess game of epic proportions, with Lincoln playing both sides of the board. And just when he was ready to make his move, he was handed a gift from the Guards, or rather, General Lee. The Union victory at the Battle of Antietam in September 1862 gave Lincoln the opportunity he needed. While it was hardly the decisive win he wanted, more of a bloody stalemate, really, it was enough of a victory for Lincoln to issue the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. This was not just about freeing slaves. It was a new war aim that shifted the focus from preserving the Union to a moral crusade against slavery. Lincoln understood the power of narrative, and he was rewriting the story of the Civil War with a pen as mighty as any sword. But let's be honest, the Emancipation Proclamation didn't free all slaves immediately. It applied only to Confederate states in rebellion, not the border states loyal to the Union. It's like offering free Wi-Fi, but only to people standing outside your house. Critics were quick to point this out, but Lincoln knew this was a strategic move to prevent the border states from joining the Confederacy. It was a classic case of political expediency wrapped in moral righteousness. Lincoln's decision-making process was often described as a blend of intuition and intellect. He didn't pretend to have all the answers, but he knew how to ask the right questions. He had this uncanny ability to turn a room full of discord into a chorus of reluctant agreement. It was said that he'd sit back in his chair, lean forward slightly, and listen, really listen, before delivering his verdict. It was a technique that was part Socratic method, part Midwest charm, and entirely effective. One of the most telling anecdotes of his presidency involves a moment of levity amidst the chaos. When urged by impatient cabinet members to act swiftly on emancipation, Lincoln reportedly said, "I hope to have God on my side, but I must have Kentucky." This was Lincoln's way of reminding everyone that while moral imperatives were crucial, political realities couldn't be ignored. He was a pragmatist wearing the cloak of an idealist, and he wore it well. Throughout these early years, Lincoln juggled more than just politics. He juggled public opinion, military strategy, and the looming specter of a divided nation. His humor, often self-deprecating, was a coping mechanism as much as a means of disarming critics. When accused of indecisiveness, he quipped, "I may walk slowly, but I never walk backward." It was this slow, deliberate pace that allowed him to navigate the minefield of his presidency with such finesse. In 1861, as the first shots of the Civil War rang out at Fort Sumter, Lincoln was thrust into the role of wartime president. It was a baptism by fire, quite literally, and the heat was on. The nation was tearing at the seams, and Lincoln was the thread trying to hold it together. He had to balance the demands of war with the principles of democracy, a task that would test even the wisest of leaders. As the war dragged on, Lincoln's leadership evolved from that of a cautious diplomat to a decisive commander-in-chief. He learned to wield the powers of the presidency like a conductor leading an orchestra, bringing harmony out of discordant notes. He navigated the choppy waters of public opinion and political opposition with a steady hand, proving that leadership isn't about having all the answers, but about asking the right questions and making tough decisions when it counts. With the Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln shifted the narrative of the Civil War from a fight for the Union to a fight for freedom. It was a bold move that redefined the stakes of the conflict and galvanized the Northern cause. The proclamation didn't just change the course of the war, it changed the course of history. Yet, as with all things Lincoln, it was a move rooted in both moral conviction and political savvy. In the early years of his presidency, Lincoln faced challenges that would have daunted lesser men. But with his trademark blend of humor humility, and resolve, he navigated the stormy seas of war and politics, proving that even in the darkest of times, leadership can be a beacon of hope. As the Civil War raged on, Lincoln's legacy was just beginning to take shape, setting the stage for the next chapter in his extraordinary story. As Lincoln settled into his role as commander-in-chief, he quickly discovered that leading a nation during wartime was akin to juggling flaming swords while riding a unicycle, blindfolded. The Civil War was not just a matter of North versus South. It was a complex tapestry of divided loyalties, shifting alliances, and military blunders that would have made even the most seasoned generals break out in a cold sweat. Lincoln's relationship with his military leaders was a roller coaster ride of epic proportions. Take General George B. McClellan, for example, a man whose caution on the battlefield could rival a cat tiptoeing around a bathtub. McClellan's hesitance to engage the Confederates was legendary, leading Lincoln to quip that if McClellan wasn't going to use the army, he might borrow it for a while. Ouch. The frustrations with McClellan were so palpable that Lincoln once remarked he would hold McClellan's horse if it would get him to fight. This was more than just gallows humor. It was Lincoln's coping mechanism in a time when the stakes were as high as a kite in a hurricane. Lincoln's use of technology was one of his more forward-thinking strategies. The man embraced the telegraph like it was the 19th century equivalent of a smartphone. From a small room in the War Department, he would send and receive telegrams at a breakneck pace, issuing orders and receiving updates with a speed that would put modern-day texters to shame. This direct communication line allowed him to maintain an unprecedented level of control over military operations. You could say Lincoln was the original social media influencer, but instead of Instagram likes, he was collecting battlefield reports. Now, let's talk about some of the significant battles that defined Lincoln's presidency. The Battle of Gettysburg, fought from July 1 to July 3, 1863, was a turning point in the Civil War. It was the kind of showdown that would have made even the Greek guards stop bickering for a moment just to watch. General Robert E. Lee, in a bold move that would have given any gambler pause, decided to invade the North. His army clashed with Union forces under General George Meade, resulting in a bloody three-day battle that left over 50,000 soldiers dead, wounded, or missing. It was a Pyrrhic victory for the Union, but a victory nonetheless, and it marked the beginning of the end for the Confederate forces. In the aftermath, Lincoln traveled to Gettysburg to deliver what would become one of the most iconic speeches in American history. The Gettysburg Address was a mere 272 words, but it packed more punch than a heavyweight boxer in his prime. Lincoln redefined the purpose of the war, transforming it into a struggle not just for the Union, but for a new birth of freedom. It was like watching a master artist turn a chaotic canvas into a masterpiece with just a few brushstrokes. The speech was so profound that it left the crowd momentarily stunned, as if they had just witnessed the unveiling of a great truth. Yet for all his triumphs, Lincoln faced constant political and military challenges. The Union's early losses and high casualty rates led to public discontent and political opposition. People were understandably upset when their sons, brothers, and fathers didn't return from the front lines. The economic strain of the war was immense, with the Union spending approximately $2 million per day. That's right, per day. It was the kind of expenditure that could make even the most liberal spender clutch their pearls. Lincoln's leadership was tested again and again by generals who were either overly cautious, like McClellan, or overly aggressive, such as Ambrose Burnside, managed to bungle things spectacularly at the Battle of Fredericksburg in December 1862. Burnside's infamous charge resulted in a catastrophic defeat, with Union casualties numbering over 12,000. It was a debacle that had Lincoln facepalming so hard you could probably hear it echo through the halls of the White House. Then there was Ulysses S. Grant, the man who would eventually become Lincoln's go-to general. Grant, unlike his predecessors, understood that the path to victory was not through timid maneuvers, but through relentless pressure. His victory at the Siege of Vicksburg in July 1863 was a masterstroke, splitting the Confederacy in two and giving the Union control of the Mississippi River. Lincoln, ever the pragmatist, recognized Grant's effectiveness and famously quipped, "I can't spare this man. he fights. It was a declaration of support that solidified Grant's position and marked a turning point in the war. Lincoln's humor, often dark and self-deprecating, was a tool that helped him navigate the turbulent waters of leadership. When criticized for Grant's rumored drinking habits, Lincoln reportedly responded, "Find out what he drinks and send a barrel to my other generals." It was a witty retort that underscored Lincoln's belief in results over appearances. In a time when morale was as fragile as a soap bubble, Lincoln's ability to inject levity into dire situations was invaluable. Throughout the Civil War, Lincoln faced not just the Confederates, but dissent from within his own ranks. The Copperheads, a faction of Northern Democrats who opposed the war, were a constant thorn in his side. They criticized Lincoln's policies and called for immediate peace with the Confederacy, even if it meant allowing slavery to continue. Lincoln knew that achieving peace at the cost of freedom was not an option, and he navigated this political minefield with the skill of a tightrope walker straddling a canyon. As the war dragged on, Lincoln's resolve never wavered, even as the toll of leadership etched deeper lines into his face. He was a man who carried the weight of a nation on his shoulders, yet still found time to tell a joke or spin a yarn. His leadership was a delicate balance of strength and empathy, a dance between the demands of war and the ideals of democracy. Lincoln was more than just the face on a penny. He was the embodiment of perseverance in the darkest of times. In the coming chapters, Lincoln's story continues to unfold with twists and turns that would make a soap opera look tame. His leadership during the latter years of the Civil War would be crucial in shaping the future of a nation teetering on the brink of collapse. But for now, let's leave our stovepipe hat-wearing hero in the midst of the storm, battling not just the Confederates, but the very soul of a divided America. The next chapter awaits, with more battles to fight, more challenges to face, and more history to make. As the storm of the Civil War reached its crescendo, Lincoln stood at the helm, more a weary sailor than a triumphant captain, navigating a ship tossed about by waves of rebellion, politics, and public opinion. But here's the kicker. Even as victory glimmered on the horizon, the Union's hard-won unity hung by a thread, and the man holding the needle was about to be cut down in the most tragic curtain call in American history. April 14, 1865, just 5 days after General Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, effectively ending the Civil War, Lincoln decided to take a well-earned evening off. He headed to Ford's Theater to catch a performance of Our American Cousin. Now, if history had a script, this would be the part where someone yells, "Don't go in there." But alas, real life offers no such foreshadowing. Lincoln settled into his private box, a rare moment of relaxation shattered by the sharp crack of a gunshot. John Wilkes Booth, a disgruntled actor with a penchant for Southern sympathies, had slipped into the box and fired a bullet that would ricochet through history. Lincoln's assassination left the nation in shock and mourning. He died the following morning, April 15, at 7:22 a.m., leaving a legacy as complex as the man himself. Booth, who reportedly shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis," thus always to tyrants, as he leapt from the box, broke his leg in the escape, adding a dash of comic justice to his treacherous act. He became the most wanted man in America, sparking a manhunt that ended 12 days later when he was cornered and killed at a Virginia farm. The immediate aftermath of Lincoln's assassination was like a gut punch to a nation already reeling from years of war. Vice President Andrew Johnson, a Southern Democrat who remained loyal to the Union, was thrust into the presidency. The transition was as seamless as a square peg in a round hole. Johnson lacked Lincoln's finesse and political acumen, and his presidency quickly became a contentious quagmire of Reconstruction-era challenges and impeachment threats. He might have worn Lincoln's shoes, but they were several sizes too big. Now, let's talk about Lincoln the legend versus Lincoln the human. Over the years, Lincoln has been elevated to near-mythical status, with tales that would make even Paul Bunyan seem grounded. We've got Lincoln the emancipator, Lincoln the savior of the Union, even Lincoln the vampire hunter if you're into speculative fiction. But hold your horses. It's essential to sift through the legend and see the man for who he was, a pragmatic leader with a deep moral compass and a penchant for strategic compromise. One of the enduring myths about Lincoln is that he was a staunch abolitionist from the start, but as we've seen, his journey was more nuanced. His primary goal was preserving the Union, with emancipation becoming a strategic necessity. It wasn't a simple case of good versus evil. It was a complex chess match on a board where every move could tip the balance toward chaos or peace. Lincoln was a master of the long game, and while his actions ultimately led to the abolition of slavery, he played his hand carefully in a political landscape fraught with peril. The economic context of Lincoln's era can't be overlooked either. The Civil War was a financial behemoth, costing the Union an estimated $19 billion, about $150 billion today. The war effort required unprecedented economic measures, including the first federal income tax and the issuance of greenbacks, a paper currency that wasn't backed by gold or silver. This was the kind of economic juggling act that would give any modern-day economist heart palpitations. Lincoln's leadership during this tumultuous period left a lasting impact on the nation. His ability to balance moral imperatives with political pragmatism set a standard for future leaders. He understood that change isn't just about ideals. It's about timing, strategy, and sometimes sheer determination. His famous words, "with malice toward none, with charity for all," encapsulate his vision for a nation healed, not just mended. They were penned with the ink of hope and resolve, a testament to his belief in reconciliation over retribution. But let's not idealize Lincoln to the point of sainthood. He was, after all, a man with flaws and limitations, just like the rest of us. He struggled with depression, faced constant criticism, and made decisions that were far from perfect. His suspension of habeas corpus during the war, for instance, was a controversial move that sparked debates about civil liberties, a reminder that even great leaders must navigate the murky waters of necessity versus principle. Lincoln's assassination turned him into a martyr, a figure enshrined in the American psyche as the ultimate symbol of sacrifice and leadership. But while it's tempting to view him through rose-colored glasses, it's crucial to recognize the gritty reality of his presidency. He was a man who faced immense challenges with a blend of humor, wisdom, and resilience. His legacy is not just in the monuments that bear his likeness, but in the enduring values of unity, equality, and justice that he championed. As we wrap up this journey through Lincoln's life, it's worth reflecting on the nature of legacy itself. History has a way of polishing the rough edges, transforming flawed humans into icons. But perhaps the true measure of greatness lies not in perfection, but in perseverance. Lincoln's story is a reminder that even in the face of adversity, leadership is about striving toward a better future, one decision at a time. In the end, Lincoln was more than just the 16th President of the United States. He was a storyteller, a dreamer, and a man who saw the potential for greatness in a nation divided. His life was a narrative of struggle and triumph, of humor and heartache, and his legacy continues to resonate through the pages of history. As we bid farewell to our stovepipe hat-wearing hero, let's remember him not as a marble statue, but as a living, breathing testament to the power of resilience and hope. In the heart of the 15th century, when France was less Allons-y and more oh la la what now, a young girl named Joan was born in the village of Domremy. Picture a place so small that if you blinked, you'd miss it, which was a real shame, because that's where one of history's most audacious underdogs got her start. Domremy was a tiny dot on the map of northeastern France, a place where the cows outnumbered the people, and gossip was the local currency. Joan, or Jeanne d'Arc as they'd say en Francais, was born around 1412 into a family of farmers. Her parents, Jacques d'Arc and Isabelle Remay, were not exactly rolling in dough. In fact, they were more like needing it just to make ends meet. Life in Domremy was about as glamorous as a muddy potato field. The D'Arc family worked hard, tilling the soil and tending to their livestock, just trying to keep food on the table. Their economic struggles were pretty standard for the time, as the 100 Years' War had turned France into a battlefield and a breeding ground for poverty. The English and French were locked in what felt like an endless staring contest, and the locals were caught in the crossfire. Taxes were high, resources were scarce, and frankly, morale was lower than a snake in a wagon rut. Now, Joan was a lot of things, but ordinary was not one of them. Even as a kid, she seemed to march to the beat of a different drum, one that only she could hear. By the time she was 13, things took a turn for the surreal. She started having visions, which she claimed were divine messages delivered by saints. That's right. Joan didn't just get words of wisdom from your average village elder. She got them from St. Michael, St. Catherine, and St. Margaret. These celestial VIPs apparently made house calls, telling her she was destined to save France. Talk about a pep talk. To the villagers, Joan's visions were a mix of fascinating and, well, kind of weird. Imagine trying to discuss the weather or the price of grain while Joan casually mentions that she's been chatting with St. Michael about military strategy. It was enough to make the local priest raise an eyebrow and maybe take a sip of communion wine a bit earlier in the day. But Joan was undeterred. She was convinced that her visions were marching orders from the top brass in heaven, and she wasn't about to ignore them. Her divine mission was a hard sell at first. The idea of a teenage farm girl leading a military campaign probably sounded as plausible as a chicken learning to play the lute. Yet, Joan was nothing if not persistent. She started telling anyone who would listen that she needed to go see the Dauphin Charles Roman VII, the uncrowned king of France, and help him reclaim his throne. Most folks in Domremy were dubious, probably whispering behind her back about her fanciful dreams and unladylike ambitions. Let's be real, Joan wasn't exactly the poster child for the medieval French army. She didn't have a noble title, a suit of armor, or even a decent horse, but she had something far more valuable: conviction. And when a teenager is convinced they're right, not even a medieval village can stand in their way. Joan's conviction was infectious, and soon enough, her oddball determination started to win people over. Her neighbors began to see her not just as the local eccentric, but as someone who might just be onto something. So here's Joan, a teenage girl from a tiny village, armed with nothing but her faith and a couple of saintly endorsements, ready to tackle the political chaos of France like it was just another day in the fields. It's like Cinderella ditching the ball to lead an army, except instead of a fairy godmother, Joan had St. Catherine giving her pep talks. The villagers, whether out of belief or sheer curiosity, eventually rallied around her. They may not have fully understood or agreed with her visions, but they saw something in her that couldn't be ignored. Maybe it was the fire in her eyes or the certainty in her voice. But Joan was about to take a leap of faith that would change history forever. And so, the legend of Joan of Arc began, not with a bang, but with the quiet resolve of a girl who believed she could change the world. Her journey from the pastures of Domremy to the battlefields of France was about to kick off, and she was ready to prove that even the most unlikely heroes can make the biggest impact. As Joan would soon show, sometimes all it takes to turn the tide of history is a little faith, a lot of courage, and a vision that sees beyond the ordinary. Joan of Arc's legendary journey from Domremy to meet Charles Roman VII was like a medieval road trip with a few more risks and a lot less Spotify. Imagine the logistics. Our teenage heroine, ready to save France, needed to cross nearly 300 miles of war-torn country. No Uber, no Google Maps, just a girl in borrowed clothes and a whole lot of guts. Now let's talk about the wardrobe situation. Traveling as a young woman in 15th century France had its challenges. Bandits, soldiers, not to mention the whole gender roles thing. So Joan made a bold decision. She disguised herself as a man. Cue the medieval makeover montage. She chopped her hair, donned some trousers, and became Jean. It was a practical move, like switching from heels to sneakers when you're about to climb a mountain. This disguise was not just about personal safety, but a tactical choice to be taken seriously in a field dominated by men. But here's the kicker. Joan's cross-dressing wasn't just a matter of convenience. It was a statement, a rebellion against the societal norms that said women were more suited to spinning yarn than spinning military strategies. The fact that she managed this transformation using the medieval equivalent of a thrift store ensemble only adds to her legend. But make no mistake, her journey was no fashion show. It was a perilous trek through a landscape ravaged by war. As Joan made her way across the countryside, she gathered a modest entourage of believers, folks intrigued by her vision, or perhaps simply curious about this fiery young woman with such audacious plans. By the time she reached the court of Charles Roman VII in Chinon, her reputation had already started to precede her. People whispered of the Maid of Lorraine, who claimed divine guidance to lead France to victory. But if Joan thought her journey was tough, she was in for a reality check at Charles's court. Picture this. Joan arrives, expecting to wow everyone with her divine mission, only to be met with skepticism so thick you could cut it with a broadsword. The court was a swirl of silk, suspicion, and political intrigue. Charles Roman VII, the Dauphin, was a king without a crown, nervously perched on the edge of power. His court was packed with advisors and nobles who were more interested in maintaining their cushy status quo than welcoming a peasant girl with wild tales of celestial visions. And here's where things get interesting. Joan had to prove she was the real deal, not just some overconfident farm girl with a penchant for cross-dressing. The court was all too eager to test her claims, and in true medieval fashion, they devised a challenge that was half reality TV, half divine test. Charles decided to play hide-and-seek among his courtiers, thinking he could outwit this peasant prophet. The idea was simple. If Joan could pick him out of a lineup without ever having seen him before, maybe she really did have some saintly backup. Now, the legend goes that Joan walked into the room, took one glance around, and zeroed in on Charles like a heat-seeking missile. Cue the gasps, the raised eyebrows, the court gossip mill spinning into overdrive. To the medieval mind, this was nothing short of miraculous. But let's pump the brakes a bit. Was it divine intervention, or did Joan have a little help from her newfound friends? After all, courtiers love to talk, and it's not like Charles was hiding behind a curtain. He was probably the one with the fanciest shoes. The truth likely lies somewhere between miracle and medieval parlor trick. Joan's ability to recognize Charles could have been informed by simple observation and a keen understanding of human nature. Remember, she was an outsider with nothing to lose, and sometimes that's the clearest perspective of all. But whether it was a miracle or just a well-played hunch, it was enough to convince Charles to take a chance on his new champion. With her foot now firmly in the door, Joan faced her next challenge, convincing the Dauphin and his skeptical courtiers that she was the savior France needed. It wasn't just about winning battles. It was about restoring the spirit of a demoralized nation. Charles, desperate for a win, decided to put this teenage warrior to the ultimate test, leading an army to lift the siege of Orleans. It was a make-or-break moment, not just for Joan, but for the future of France. And so, armed with a banner, a borrowed sword, and an unwavering belief in her divine mission, Joan set off to prove that even the most unlikely heroes could change the course of history. But as she prepared to face the English, she knew that faith alone wouldn't be enough. Her journey was just beginning, and while the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, Joan was ready to show the world that sometimes all it takes is one person to light the spark of change. And so, with a banner in hand and a borrowed sword by her side, Joan of Arc marched toward the siege of Orleans, a teenager ready to rewrite the script of war. Now, if you've ever tried to organize a road trip with friends, you might have a tiny inkling of the chaos that Joan faced. Imagine that times 1,000, with the added bonus of medieval logistics. Joan wasn't just going to battle. She was stepping into a logistical quagmire that would make even the most seasoned event planner cry into their spreadsheets. First, let's lay out the scene. It's 1429, and Orleans is the last major stronghold keeping the French from being completely overrun by the English. The city had been under siege for about 7 months, and its defenders were as tired and hungry as a college student during finals week. Supplies were dwindling, morale was tanking, and the English were parked outside the city like they were tailgating at a medieval football game. Enter Joan, the unexpected MVP with celestial endorsements, ready to rally the troops and give the English a run for their money. But before she could even think about kicking some English butt, she had to navigate the battlefield of medieval bureaucracy. Picture a teenager trying to convince a room full of grumpy, skeptical nobles and military commanders that she knew how to lead an army. It was like trying to sell a skateboard to a room full of people who'd never even seen a wheel. The French commanders, to put it mildly, were not thrilled about taking orders from a teenage girl who claimed to have guard on speed dial. They were used to the kind of warfare that involved sieges, slow marches, and the occasional bout of bubonic plague, not a fiery young woman with more enthusiasm than experience. But Joan, with her uncanny ability to inspire, soon won them over. Her secret weapon, a relentless optimism and a banner that seemed to wave with divine fervor. Let's talk about that banner for a second. Joan's standard was a symbol as powerful as any sword, depicting the names of Jesus and Mary, along with a depiction of God holding the world. It was like a medieval neon sign saying, "Here comes the chosen one." And Joan wielded it like a pro, rallying the troops with the kind of zeal that made even the most cynical soldier stop and think, maybe we've got a shot. The romanticized image of Joan as a fearless warrior charging into battle with her banner held high is undeniably appealing. But the reality was messier. Medieval warfare was not for the faint of heart or the weak of stomach. Armies were essentially mobile communities, complete with blacksmiths, cooks, and yes, even a few livestock thrown in for good measure. Soldiers faced constant threats from disease, dehydration, and dysentery, more enemies than the English themselves. Joan's role was as much about boosting morale as it was about tactical genius. She wasn't drawing up battle plans in a tent like some medieval Napoleon. She was out there, riding among the troops, a living, breathing symbol of hope and divine favor. Her presence alone was enough to turn the tide of despair into a wave of determination. Her strategy was less about military maneuvers and more about inspiring a demoralized army to believe in the impossible. But let's not sugarcoat it. Joan's presence didn't magically solve all logistical nightmares. The French army still had to deal with the reality of medieval supply lines, which were about as reliable as a chocolate teapot. Moving an army required a staggering amount of food, weapons, and other supplies, all of which had to be transported over rough terrain. It was a logistical puzzle that would make a modern military quartermaster break out in hives. Despite these challenges, Joan's arrival at Orleans was like a shot of adrenaline to the French forces. Her first order of business was to get past the English blockade and into the city. Using a combination of daring night maneuvers and sheer audacity, Joan and her forces managed to slip through the English lines, bringing much-needed supplies and a morale boost to the beleaguered city. It was a move that would make even the most jaded strategist nod in approval. Inside Orleans, Joan's influence was immediate. The defenders, who had been on the brink of surrender, suddenly found themselves infused with new life. She encouraged them to take the offensive, planning a series of assaults on the English positions that were as bold as they were unexpected. Joan's confidence was infectious, and her belief in her divine mission convinced many that they were fighting a righteous battle. The siege of Orleans wasn't just a military endeavor, it was a psychological one. Joan's presence challenged the status quo, shaking up the established order and forcing everyone to reconsider what was possible. Her leadership style was unconventional, relying on charisma and conviction rather than rank or experience. It was the kind of leadership that made even the most seasoned warriors question their assumptions. And here's where the myth and reality diverge. The legend paints Joan as a fearless warrior, untouched by doubt or fear. In truth, she was a human being, facing the same fears and uncertainties as anyone thrust into the chaos of war. Her bravery wasn't in the absence of fear, but in her ability to act despite it. She was a teenager, after all, with all the vulnerabilities and insecurities that come with youth. Yet she carried the weight of a nation's hopes on her shoulders with a grace that belied her age. As Joan led the charge against the English, her banner waving defiantly in the wind, she became a living symbol of France's resistance. Her tactical role may have been more inspirational than strategic, but her impact was undeniable. The French forces, spurred on by her example, launched a series of successful attacks that eventually broke the siege. On May 8, 1429, the English were forced to retreat, marking a turning point in the 100 Years' War. But let's not get too carried away with the idea of a clean, decisive victory. The aftermath of the siege left Orleans in ruins, its people exhausted, and its resources depleted. War, as always, was an expensive business, both in terms of human life and economic cost. Rebuilding would take time, money, and effort, resources that were in short supply in a country ravaged by decades of conflict. Joan's triumph at Orleans was a testament to the power of belief and the strength of a single determined individual. Yet it also highlighted the harsh realities of medieval warfare, where victory was often as much about endurance as it was about strategy. Joan's success was not just in lifting the siege, but in lifting the spirits of a nation that had nearly lost hope. As the dust settled and the cheers of victory faded, Joan's journey was far from over. She had proven herself on the battlefield, but the path ahead was fraught with new challenges. Her next goal was to see Charles Roman VII crowned in Rheims, a political move as crucial as any military victory. Joan had set a precedent, showing that even the most unlikely heroes could wield incredible power. But as history would soon reveal, power came with its own set of dangers and dilemmas. And so, as Joan looked toward the horizon, she knew that her mission was just beginning. The road ahead was long and fraught with danger, but she was ready to face whatever came next. She had become a beacon of hope in a world shrouded in darkness, a reminder that even the smallest spark could ignite a revolution. The siege of Orleans was just the beginning of Joan's incredible journey, a journey that would continue to defy expectations and challenge the very fabric of history. As Joan looked toward the horizon, she knew that her mission was just beginning. Her victory at Orleans had been a shot in the arm for France, but it was far from the end of her story. The road to Rheims, where she aimed to see Charles Roman VII crowned, was paved with political potholes, and spoiler alert, a few more plot twists than a daytime soap opera. Fast forward a bit. Joan's star was on the rise, but like any good drama, there's always a twist waiting in the wings. Her success didn't just catch the attention of the French, it also ruffled a few feathers across the channel. The English were not exactly thrilled about their new nemesis, who seemed to have divine favor and a knack for rallying troops. To them, Joan was less a holy savior and more a pesky thorn in their side. And let's not forget the Burgundians, French allies of the English, who watched Joan's rise with all the warmth of a medieval ice cube. In May 1430, Joan found herself in the thick of it again, this time at Campigny. Here, the Burgundians were laying siege to the city, and Joan, ever the firebrand, was determined to break it. She charged into the fray, but as fate would have it, not every battle ends with a victory parade. During a skirmish, she was knocked off her horse and captured by the Burgundians. Talk about a plot twist. 1 minute, you're a national hero. The next, you're being carted off by the enemy. It's the medieval equivalent of going viral for all the wrong reasons. Here's where things start to get ugly. The Burgundians saw Joan as a valuable bargaining chip, a chance to curry favor with the English. So they sold her to the English for 10,000 livres tournois. That's roughly $3. 6 million today, not exactly chump change. The English had big plans for Joan, and none of them involved a hero's welcome. They wanted her discredited, and preferably out of the picture, like yesterday's trendy dance craze. Enter the trial of Joan of Arc, a spectacle that was as much about politics as it was about justice. Picture a courtroom drama where the scales of justice are rigged, and the judge is more interested in his own agenda than the truth. The English were determined to paint Joan as a heretic and a witch, because nothing screams legitimate threat like a teenage girl in armor who claims divine backing. The trial was held in Rouen, and it was about as fair as a rigged carnival game. The charges against Joan were a grab bag of medieval paranoia, heresy, witchcraft, cross-dressing. Yes, they were still hung up on that, and a general disregard for the patriarchy. The judges, a gaggle of clerics eager to please their English overlords, were about as impartial as a referee with a team jersey under his coat. Let's take a moment to marvel at the irony here. Joan, who had become a symbol of French unity and resistance, was now being condemned as a traitor and a witch. It was like condemning a superhero for flying without a license. But the medieval mindset was nothing if not imaginative when it came to demonizing those they couldn't control. The trial dragged on for months, a drawn-out affair filled with absurd accusations and theological hair-splitting. Joan, with her peasant's education and saintly visions, was no match for the educated clergy who grilled her with questions designed to trip her up. Yet she held her ground, answering with a clarity and conviction that must have left the judges squirming in their seats. Her responses were sharp, like when she was asked if she believed she was in God's grace, a loaded question that could have damned her either way. Her answer, "If I am not, may God put me there. If I am, may God so keep me." Not bad for a teenager under fire, but logic and eloquence were not going to save Joan. The trial was a foregone conclusion, a medieval show trial where the outcome had been decided long before the gavel hit the block. The charges of heresy stuck, not because they were true, but because they served a political purpose. The English needed Joan discredited, and the Burgundians were happy to oblige. Finally, after months of courtroom drama, the verdict came down. Joan was guilty. The punishment, death by burning at the stake, a grim reminder of the era's penchant for theatrical finales. On May 30, 1431, Joan was led to the marketplace in Rouen, where she met her fate with the kind of courage and grace that had defined her short life. As the flames rose around her, Joan called out for her savior, her last words a testament to her unwavering faith. It was a tragic end, but one that would only solidify her place in history. The English might have hoped to erase her legacy, but instead they turned her into a martyr, a symbol of resistance and faith that would endure long after the smoke had cleared. The trial of Joan of Arc is a stark reminder that justice, much like history, is often written by the victors, but it's also a testament to the power of conviction and the impact of one brave soul standing against the tide. Joan's story didn't end in the flames of Rouen. It lived on, inspiring generations to question authority and believe in the impossible. And while the English and their allies might have thought they'd put an end to the Maid of Orleans, they'd unwittingly ignited a different kind of fire, one that would burn in the hearts of the French people for centuries to come. Joan's life, her trial, and her death became a rallying cry for a nation, a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope can rise from the ashes. So, as Joan's story continued to echo through the annals of history, it's clear that her legacy was more than just a footnote in a dusty old chronicle. It was a testament to the enduring power of belief and the unyielding spirit of a young girl from Domremy who dared to dream of a better world. And while her life was cut tragically short, the flame she sparked would light the way for those who followed, proving that even in the face of overwhelming odds, one person can change the course of history. Joan of Arc's story might have ended in a blaze of injustice, but her legacy was just getting warmed up. Fast forward to 1456, a full 25 years after her death, when the tides of history decided to put on a more flattering outfit for Joan. Enter the posthumous retrial, a medieval attempt at righting a wrong and giving Joan a much-needed reputation makeover. This wasn't just a simple nod to her bravery. It was a full-blown exoneration campaign, complete with a papal investigation that had all the drama of a medieval courtroom reboot. The retrial, ordered by Pope Calixtus Roman III, was a calculated move both politically and spiritually. With France and England no longer at each other's throats, the French crown was eager to polish Joan's tarnished image, partly to bolster its own legitimacy. After all, nothing says, "We were right all along," like turning your biggest martyr into a posthumous hero. So, they dug into the archives, dusted off the old trial records, and found more holes than a Swiss cheese. The retrial was a medieval PR blitz, with witnesses aplenty, some of whom had the benefit of hindsight on their side. Friends, comrades, and even former skeptics came forward to testify in Joan's favor, painting her not as a heretic, but as a divinely guided patriot. This time, the scales of justice tipped heavily in Joan's direction. After months of testimony, the verdict was in. Joan was innocent, her original trial was a sham, and her execution was a grotesque miscarriage of justice. Cue the medieval equivalent of a standing ovation, with a side of divine vindication. This rehabilitation wasn't just a legal victory, it was a cultural shift. Joan was no longer just a footnote in a bloody war. She was a symbol, a banner under which a fractured nation could rally. Her transformation from condemned witch to national heroine was nothing short of a historical plot twist, the kind that makes you wonder if history was penned by a team of soap opera writers. But the story doesn't end with her exoneration. Fast forward a few centuries, and Joan's narrative takes another dramatic turn. In 1920, nearly 500 years after her death, Joan was canonized by the Catholic Church, officially becoming Saint Joan of Arc. Talk about a glow-up. From farm girl to martyr to saint, Joan's journey through history is like Cinderella's story if Cinderella had traded her glass slipper for a sword. So why the sudden saintly status? Well, let's face it, Joan's story had all the elements of a blockbuster hit. A humble beginning, divine visions, a rise to fame, a tragic downfall, and an enduring legacy. The Catholic Church recognized not just her faith, but her ability to inspire generations, a testament to the power of belief, even when the world seems hell-bent on tearing you down. Joan's canonization was also a reflection of the times. Post-World War I France was in desperate need of national heroes, figures who embodied resilience and unity. Joan, with her unyielding spirit and patriotic fervor, fit the bill perfectly. She became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, one person could stand up and change the course of history. And here's the kicker. Joan's story, with all its twists and turns, continues to captivate us today. She's been immortalized in plays, movies, books, and even video games. Her likeness graces everything from Gothic cathedrals to modern art installations. She's a cultural icon, a historical enigma, and a source of endless fascination for anyone with a penchant for dramatic tales. But let's not sugarcoat it. Joan's legacy is riddled with contradictions. She's a saint who led armies, a peasant who conversed with kings, a figure of unity born from conflict. Her story is both a testament to the power of faith and a cautionary tale about the dangers of power. It's a reminder that history is never as simple as it seems, often reading more like a soap opera than a textbook. And as we wrap up our journey through Joan's life, it's worth noting that her story is as much about us as it is about her. It's a reflection of our collective hopes, fears, and the eternal struggle for justice. Joan of Arc may have lived in a time of knights and castles, but her spirit transcends the ages, reminding us that courage is timeless, and the fight for what's right is never truly over. So, next time you find yourself caught up in the whirlwind of history, think of Joan, the girl from Domremy who dared to dream of a better world. Her story is a beacon, a reminder that even the smallest spark can ignite a revolution. And while the pages of history may continue to turn, Joan's legacy will forever burn brightly, a testament to the enduring power of belief and the unyielding spirit of a true hero. If you thought surviving a game of Monopoly with your family was tough, wait till you hear about Catherine Parr navigating the marital minefield that was Tudor England. Born in 1512 to a family that wasn't exactly the Tudors, but wasn't exactly the Smiths either, Catherine was decent marriage material, a total catch, if you will. Her father, Sir Thomas Parr, was a knight, which back then was a pretty sweet gig. You got to wear shiny armor and didn't have to worry about health insurance. Her mother, Maud, was a lady-in-waiting to Catherine of Aragon, which was basically like getting a backstage pass to the medieval concert that was the English court. Now, before you think Catherine was just another damsel in distress waiting for her prince, let's talk brass tacks. The Parrs weren't rolling in dough like Bill Gates, but they weren't pinching pennies either. They had enough clout to rub elbows with the big shots, but not so much that they could ignore the king's wandering eye, or axe, for that matter. They were the middle-class dream, minus the minivans and Starbucks addiction. Catherine's early life was a crash course in playing the political long game. Her first romance was more of an arranged board meeting than a love affair. At 17, she married Sir Edward Bourg, an affair that was less Romeo and Juliet and more business merger. Sir Edward wasn't exactly the life of the party. He was sickly and kicked the bucket by 1533, leaving Catherine a widow at 21. A sudden tragedy, sure, but also a golden opportunity in the game of marital musical chairs. Enter John Neville, Lord Latimer, husband number 2. He was about 2 decades older, which was practically a time zone in marital age differences back then. Lord Latimer had estates in Yorkshire and the social standing to boot, which meant Catherine was moving up the food chain. But life with Lord Latimer wasn't all wine and roses. Picture this. In 1536, the Pilgrimage of Grace, a massive rebellion against Henry's religious policies, swept through England. Imagine thousands of disgruntled subjects storming the streets like it was Black Friday. Latimer was dragged into the chaos, and Catherine found herself playing the role of diplomat, pleading for her husband's life and safety. Forget Netflix dramas. This was the real deal. With Lord Latimer's death in 1543, Catherine was once again left to navigate the choppy waters of widowhood. But this time, she was a seasoned sailor. Her charm and intelligence caught the attention of none other than King Henry Roman VIII. Now, Henry had a bit of a reputation. By this point, he had already gone through 5 wives, 2 divorces, 2 beheadings, and 1 death. Talk about baggage. Catherine wasn't exactly lining up for a roller coaster ride that could end with her head on a chopping block, yet there she was, the perfect candidate for wife number 6. Why Catherine, you ask? Well, Catherine was no fool. She was well-educated, fluent in French, Latin, and Italian, a veritable Tudor polyglot. She was also a religious reformer and a political pragmatist, with a knack for keeping her head when everyone else was losing theirs, literally. Henry saw in her a woman who could not only soothe his aching heart, but also help nurse his ailing leg. Romantic, right. But let's not forget the backdrop here. England in the 1540 was a hotbed of political intrigue, religious upheaval, and more backstabbing than a Shakespearean tragedy. Henry's marital exploits were the medieval equivalent of a soap opera, with the king's wives serving as both leading ladies and tragic heroines. Catherine had to be clever, calculating, and charismatic to survive in a court where the wrong move could make you lose your head in more ways than one. Catherine Parr's journey to the throne was a masterclass in navigating the treacherous waters of Tudor politics. She was a survivor in a world where survival was never guaranteed, and as history would show, becoming the last of Henry's wives was not just about love, but about playing the ultimate game of thrones, where the stakes were life and death, and the rewards were as unpredictable as the man she was about to marry. Stay tuned, because Catherine's story is just getting started. In the grand tapestry of Tudor England, Catherine Parr found herself in a precarious position, playing the ultimate game of romantic chess with King Henry Roman VIII, a man known for changing wives like some people change their socks. But let's be real, this wasn't your typical fairy tale courtship. Picture less ballroom waltz and more navigating a minefield on a unicycle. Romantic dinners were swapped for tactical discussions, and roses were replaced by the prickly thorns of political maneuvering. Now, Henry didn't woo Catherine with just sweet nothings and poetry. Oh no, he brought out the big guns, titles, power, and the ever-looming threat of an executioner's axe if things went south. Catherine, being the astute player she was, knew this courtship was less about love and more about survival. After all, Henry's previous wives had experienced more drama than a soap opera marathon. Catherine of Aragon's painful divorce, Anne Boleyn's infamous beheading, Jane Seymour's tragic death post-childbirth, Anne of Cleves' quick annulment, and Catherine Howard's execution. It was more Tudors gone wild than Cinderella. Henry's courtship involved a series of elaborate gestures, which in Tudor terms meant a lot of public displays of affection and grandiose promises. But with Henry, it was also about the politics. He needed a queen who could handle the increasing religious tensions and keep his court in check. Catherine, with her reformist views and diplomatic skills, was the answer to his prayers, or at least his political quandaries. She was the equivalent of a Swiss army knife in a court full of single-function tools. Now, on to the logistics of royal weddings. When Henry decided to put a ring on it, it wasn't just a private affair. We're talking about an event that required the coordination skills of an Olympic opening ceremony planner. The wedding itself, held on July 12, 1543, was a subdued affair by royal standards. But don't let the lack of pomp fool you. This was a strategic move. With England's coffers not exactly overflowing, Henry couldn't afford to host a blowout bash. The costs of royal weddings were astronomical, even by today's standards. Think custom-made gowns, extravagant feasts, and enough gold thread to weave a tapestry of the entire royal family, past and present. Catherine's fashion choices were not just about looking good, but about sending a message. Her wedding dress was likely woven with cloth of gold, a fabric so luxurious it practically screamed queen material, louder than Henry's court jester. These fabrics didn't come cheap. Some could cost up to £10 per yard. To put that in perspective, the average labourer earned around £6 a year. So, no pressure, right? Beyond the wedding finery, Catherine needed to navigate the treacherous waters of court life, which was as much about staying alive as it was about staying in favour. Henry's court was a veritable game of thrones, where alliances shifted like sands in the wind, and one wrong move could lead to the Tower of London, or worse. Catherine had to be as sharp as a Tudor dagger, keeping her allies close and her enemies guessing. She used her position to advocate for religious reform and education, subtly pushing for changes while keeping Henry's volatile temper in check. Imagine balancing a stack of plates while riding a unicycle and simultaneously dodging arrows. That's what it was like being queen to Henry. Catherine's charm offensive extended beyond the king. She forged alliances with key figures at court, becoming a patron of the arts and a champion of learning. She even had the audacity to publish her own book, Prayers or Meditations, making her the first Queen of England to publish under her own name. Talk about breaking the glass ceiling while wearing a crown. Catherine's political savvy was her lifeline. She knew when to speak up and when to keep her head down, literally and figuratively. Her influence over Henry was subtle yet significant, like a gentle breeze that could steer a ship without causing a storm. She played the long game, ensuring that she not only survived, but thrived in a world where the odds were perpetually stacked against her. As for the marriage itself, it was not without its challenges. Henry was plagued by ill health, and Catherine often found herself acting more as a nurse than a wife. His infamous leg ulcer, a festering reminder of his mortality, was a constant source of pain and irritation, both for him and for anyone within smelling distance. Yet Catherine managed to maintain the peace, soothing his ego and his ailments with equal skill. While their union was not the passionate love story of Hollywood legend, it was a partnership of mutual benefit. Catherine provided Henry with the stability he craved, while he offered her the protection of the crown, a necessity in a time and place where being a woman with opinions could be as dangerous as crossing a Tudor king. She was the final piece in Henry's matrimonial puzzle, and perhaps his most cunning match. Stay tuned, because Catherine's ability to survive and thrive in this deadly game is nothing short of legendary. With her eyes on the prize and her head firmly on her shoulders, she navigated the perilous waters of the Tudor court with grace, wit, and an unyielding will to survive. The story of Catherine Parr is far from over, and the next chapters promise even more intrigue, danger, and a queen who refused to be a pawn in someone else's game. The tale of Catherine Parr as queen continues to unfold like a well-worn page-turner you can't put down. Once in the queen's seat, Catherine didn't kick back and relax. She went straight to work, like a CEO hired to turn around a flailing company. And boy, did she have her work cut out for her. The royal household was less a well-oiled machine and more a clunky contraption held together by outdated traditions and the whims of a capricious king. First on her agenda was a bit of spring cleaning, figuratively speaking. The royal accounts were a mess, as tangled as a medieval ball of yarn. Catherine took a red pen to the expenses, scrutinizing the household accounts with the precision of a modern-day accountant. Imagine the shock of the courtiers when they realized their queen was not just a figurehead, but a hands-on manager. She trimmed the budget with the enthusiasm of a hairdresser at a makeover show, ensuring funds weren't hemorrhaging out of the treasury like a bad investment. And let's face it, with a court that could rival the population of a small village, upwards of 600 people, every penny counted. For Catherine, reforming the royal household wasn't just about saving money. It was about efficiency and modernity. She implemented new protocols and ensured the staff were held accountable for their duties. This wasn't just a queen in name. This was a queen in action, setting the stage for future queens to follow suit. But Catherine's ambitions didn't stop at fiscal responsibility. Her influence extended to the spiritual realm, where she pushed for religious reform with the deftness of a chess master. Henry, despite his infamous split from the Catholic Church, was as unpredictable as a cat on a hot tin roof when it came to religion. One minute, he was the staunch defender of Protestant reform. The next, he was reaching back to old Catholic rituals, like a man searching for his favorite pair of slippers. Catherine, however, was a quiet advocate for the Protestant cause, a stance that was as dangerous as it was daring. She used her position to promote scholars and clerics who shared her reformist views. With the king's ear, Catherine delicately nudged Henry toward more progressive religious policies. It was a high-stakes game of persuasion that could have cost her everything if she made one wrong move. In 1544, she published Prayers or Meditations, a collection of translations and thoughts on religious devotion. She wasn't just the first queen to publish a book under her own name. She was a woman publicly sharing her theological insights, a bold move at a time when women were more often seen than heard. The book was a hit, its first edition selling out faster than a concert ticket release, marking a significant milestone in religious literature and women's empowerment. Yet, for all her successes, Catherine's position was never secure. Henry's mood swings were as unpredictable as English weather. One day he'd be showering her with affection, the next he was a tempest, ready to lash out at the slightest provocation. It was like riding a roller coaster blindfolded, hoping the tracks hadn't been sabotaged. One of the most dangerous storms brewed in 1546 when Catherine's religious leanings nearly became her undoing. A faction at court, eager to see her fall, accused her of heresy, a serious charge that could easily end with a one-way ticket to the Tower of London. The king was initially persuaded by their arguments, as changeable as ever. But Catherine, displaying her trademark savvy, managed to talk her way out of the perilous situation. She approached Henry with humility and charm, convincing him that her religious debates were not challenges to his authority, but rather spirited discussions meant to enhance her understanding. It was a masterclass in diplomacy and self-preservation, and it saved her life. Behind the scenes, Catherine's intelligence and wit were her greatest allies. She was a woman who knew when to speak and when to listen, when to act and when to retreat. This was no damsel in distress. This was a queen who understood the power of patience and the art of persuasion. Economically, managing the royal household was akin to juggling flaming torches. The cost of running the court was astronomical, with expenses for food, clothing, and entertainment spiraling into the stratosphere. Take, for instance, the cost of feeding the court, a daily operation that could put modern catering companies to shame. Feeding hundreds of courtiers, servants, and guests required not just resources, but logistics worthy of a military campaign. The annual budget for provisions alone could run into thousands of pounds, a staggering sum in an era when the average annual income for a noble was about £150. Catherine's reforms aimed to streamline these operations, ensuring efficiency without sacrificing the grandeur expected of a Tudor court. Her ability to maintain the lavish lifestyle required of a queen while keeping the books balanced was nothing short of miraculous. In the grand tapestry of her reign, Catherine Parr was a queen who defied the odds. She managed to keep her head, both literally and figuratively, in a court where losing it was a real possibility. Her legacy as a reformer and a survivor set the stage for future queens, proving that intelligence and diplomacy could be just as powerful as swords and scepters. The story of Catherine Parr is far from over. She was not just Henry's last wife. She was a trailblazer, a woman who navigated the treacherous waters of Tudor politics with a steady hand and a sharp mind. As we delve deeper into her life, more layers of her story unfold, revealing a queen who was as complex as she was courageous. Stay tuned, because the next chapter promises to be as riveting as the last, with more tales of intrigue, survival, and a queen who refused to be anything less than extraordinary. With Henry's health on a steady decline, Catherine Parr found herself in the precarious position of managing not just a kingdom, but a king who was fast becoming more liability than monarch. Imagine trying to steer a ship with a captain who's more interested in his next meal than the storm brewing on the horizon. Henry's physical ailments were well documented. He was the guy who could make a medieval doctor's day with his laundry list of ailments. His leg ulcer was a notorious party crasher, and his girth made it increasingly difficult for him to move without help. Yet, despite the odds stacked higher than a Jenga tower, Catherine navigated these challenges with the finesse of a master tactician. First, let's talk about how Catherine discreetly managed her own affairs while keeping the king's court from spiraling into chaos. It was like playing chess against a dozen opponents while blindfolded, with the stakes being her very survival. She was acutely aware that Henry's court was a powder keg of political intrigue, with factions jostling for power like sharpers on Black Friday. The Catholic faction was particularly eager to see her downfall, viewing her Protestant leanings as a threat to their influence over the king. Catherine, however, was a master of the soft power play. She maintained a delicate balance, ensuring she never overstepped her bounds while subtly forwarding her reformist agenda. An example of her political acumen can be seen in her relationship with Princess Mary, Henry's daughter from his first marriage. Mary was a staunch Catholic and was often at odds with her father's religious policies. Catherine, rather than confronting Mary's beliefs head-on, chose a more diplomatic route. She treated Mary with respect and kindness, fostering a relationship that was beneficial to her standing at court. This was no small feat, considering the religious tensions that were thicker than a Tudor-era pot of porridge. Catherine's survival tactics also included deftly handling courtly intrigues that could have led her straight to the Tower of London, or worse. In fact, Henry's deteriorating mood swings were as predictable as a cat's affection, and Catherine had to be perpetually on her toes. In one particularly harrowing episode in 1546, she was accused of heresy, an accusation that had more bite than bark given the stakes. The charges stemmed from her religious discussions with Henry, which her enemies twisted into a narrative of insubordination. This was a classic case of court intrigue, where a casual comment could be warped into a weapon of mass destruction. Catherine responded with a masterclass in damage control. She approached Henry with humility, presenting her theological debates not as challenges, but as learning opportunities, cleverly framing herself as a student eager for her husband's wisdom. It was a diplomatic coup that not only saved her skin, but also reaffirmed her position as queen. Economically, Catherine was no slouch. Managing the royal household was akin to running a Fortune 500 company with the budgetary constraints of a small business. The cost of maintaining the court was astronomical. Feeding the royal entourage could drain resources faster than a Tudor could drain a goblet of wine. The expenses included not just food and clothing, but a bevy of entertainments meant to distract and delight a king who was increasingly difficult to please. Catherine implemented financial reforms like a medieval CFO, tightening the purse strings without compromising the grandeur expected of the Tudor court. It was a balancing act worthy of an Olympic gymnast, as she ensured the court's operations ran smoothly without hemorrhaging money. In a time when being a woman with power was as dangerous as being a heretic, Catherine's ability to navigate the Tudor court was nothing short of legendary. She understood that her survival depended not just on her intelligence, but on her ability to read the room, whether it was a court filled with schemers or a king whose moods were as changeable as the English weather. Her secret weapon, an unyielding will to survive, and a keen understanding of human nature. She knew that in a world ruled by men, her best defense was her mind, her charisma, and her unrivaled ability to play the long game. As Henry's health continued to decline, Catherine's role as queen took on an even more significant dimension. She became the de facto regent when Henry was incapacitated, overseeing the kingdom with a steady hand. Her regency was marked by a focus on stability and continuity, ensuring that England didn't fall into chaos in the absence of a strong king. It was a testament to her political savvy that she managed to keep the kingdom intact, no small feat considering the ever-present threat of rebellion and foreign invasion. She was like an air traffic controller at a busy airport, ensuring that all planes, political, religious, and economic, landed safely without incident. In her personal affairs, Catherine showed remarkable foresight. She maintained her own network of allies and supporters, cultivating relationships that would serve her well in the future. Her correspondence with key figures at court provides a glimpse into her strategic mind. In letters, she often emphasized loyalty and discretion, knowing full well that in the Tudor court, a misplaced word could mean the difference between power and peril. Catherine's ability to survive the treacherous waters of Tudor politics was not just about dodging bullets, but about understanding that every move was part of a larger game. She was a queen who understood the importance of legacy, not just for herself, but for the future of the monarchy. Her influence on Henry's children, especially Elizabeth, would resonate long after her time as queen had ended. Catherine's emphasis on education and religious reform left an indelible mark on the young princess, who would later become one of England's most famous monarchs. In the end, Catherine Parr's life was not just a story of survival, but a testament to the power of intelligence, patience, and diplomacy. She was a queen who refused to be a pawn in someone else's game, a woman who understood that the real power lay not in titles or crowns, but in the ability to shape one's destiny in a world determined to do otherwise. As we continue to explore her life, we'll see how Catherine's legacy extended beyond her marriage to Henry, influencing the course of English history in ways that were both profound and enduring. Her story is far from over, promising more tales of intrigue, survival, and a queen who was as much a force of nature as the tumultuous times in which she lived. Stay tuned, because the next chapter will delve deeper into her life after Henry, where her resilience and determination shine brighter than ever. As the curtain fell on Henry Roman VIII reign in January 1547, Catherine Parr, the last woman standing from his matrimonial circus, found herself catapulted from the chaos of the court to the freedom of widowhood. But let's not break out the champagne just yet. Being a widow in Tudor England didn't mean you got to retire to a cozy cottage with a cat and a good book. No, it was more like being handed a new deck of cards in a game where the rules changed daily. Catherine, ever the pragmatist, wasted no time in reshuffling her life. Enter Thomas Seymour, the dashing rogue with a smile that could launch 1,000 ships, or at least a few rumors. Thomas, brother to the late Jane Seymour and uncle to the newly crowned Edward VIII, was the kind of man who could charm the birds from the trees and the coins from your purse. He and Catherine had shared a mutual spark back before she had to swap romance for royalty with Henry. Now, with the king's shadow no longer looming over her, the two rekindled their relationship with the kind of speed that would make a modern dating app blush. Their marriage, a mere 5 months after Henry's death, was a scandalous blend of passion and controversy. In Tudor times, such a quick remarriage was akin to posting your relationship status on social media while still at the funeral. Yet, Catherine was no shrinking violet. She was a woman who knew what she wanted, and this time, what she wanted was a life not dictated by the whims of a king. Their union was a testament to the fact that love in the Tudor era wasn't all about political alliances and dowries. Sometimes, it was about grabbing happiness with both hands and defying the naysayers. Now, onto the role of stepmother to the future Elizabeth I, a young girl who, by all accounts, was as sharp as a tack and as wily as a fox. Elizabeth came to live with Catherine and Thomas, a move that was less about domestic bliss and more about securing royal favor. Catherine treated Elizabeth with the same intellectual respect she had shown Henry's other children, prioritizing her education and nurturing her formidable talents. Under Catherine's roof, Elizabeth was exposed to the kind of enlightened thinking that would later define her own reign. Picture a young princess absorbing the lessons of political strategy and religious reform like a sponge, all while dodging the pitfalls of courtly life. But let's not sugarcoat it. Catherine's domestic life with Thomas wasn't all sunshine and sonnets. Thomas Seymour, ever the opportunist, had ambitions that rivaled the size of Henry's waistline. His flirtations with Elizabeth, then just a teenager, raised eyebrows and blood pressures alike. While historians debate the nature of these interactions, it's clear that Catherine found herself navigating a minefield of jealousy and scandal. It was a precarious position that demanded all the diplomatic finesse she had honed during her years at Henry's court. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, Catherine's untimely death. In August 1548, Catherine died shortly after giving birth to her only child, Mary Seymour. The cause? Likely puerperal fever, a common and deadly postpartum infection in an era when medical knowledge was about as advanced as a medieval map. She was 36 years old, and her death marked a tragic end to a life that had been as tumultuous as it was remarkable. So, was Catherine Parr truly a survivor? Well, she certainly outlived her notorious husband and avoided the grisly fates that befell some of her predecessors. But surviving in Tudor England was less about dodging the axe and more about navigating the shifting sands of power with agility and grace. Catherine's real legacy lies in her ability to influence the course of history from behind the scenes. Her advocacy for religious reform and education, especially for women, set the stage for future generations. She was a woman who wielded power not through force, but through intellect and diplomacy, proving that brains could indeed triumph over brawn. As we reflect on her life, it's clear that Catherine Parr was more than just the last in a line of royal wives. She was a trailblazer in her own right, challenging the traditional roles of women in Tudor society. In a world where women were often relegated to the background, Catherine stepped into the spotlight, not with the fiery bravado of an Anne Boleyn, but with the steady, unyielding strength of a woman who knew her worth. Her story is a testament to the power of resilience, the importance of education, and the enduring impact of quiet strength. Catherine's story reminds us that history survivors are not just those who escape unscathed, but those who leave an indelible mark on the world. Her life was a complex tapestry of love, loss, power, and perseverance, woven with the threads of ambition and intellect. She navigated the treacherous waters of Tudor politics with a steady hand and a sharp mind, proving that a queen's influence could extend far beyond the throne. In the end, Catherine Parr's legacy is a reflection of the realities faced by women in Tudor England, the delicate dance between power and peril, the struggle for education and reform, and the fight for a voice in a world determined to silence them. Her life is a reminder that history's most compelling stories are often those of the people who refuse to be defined by the constraints of their time. As we close the book on Catherine Parr, we do so with a sense of admiration and awe for a woman who was both a product and a pioneer of her era. Her story, much like the Tudor court itself, is a rich tapestry of intrigue and ambition, threaded through with the enduring spirit of a queen who refused to be a mere footnote in history. And as we leave her tale behind, we carry forward the lessons she imparted: the power of resilience, the importance of intellect, and the undeniable impact of a woman determined to change her world. In a world where dragons are less mythical creatures and more embroidered patterns on imperial robes, one woman managed to rewrite the rules of the game, and she did it with a flair that would make even today's political powerhouses take notes. Welcome to 7th century China, a land of rigid hierarchies, cultural sophistication, and of course, all the backstabbing you'd expect from a court filled with people who'd probably poison your tea if it meant a promotion. Our protagonist, Wu Zetian, the woman who turned the Tang dynasty on its head and became China's first and only female emperor. Not bad for someone who started as a concubine, right? Now, let's rewind a bit to Wu's early years. Born in 624 AD during the Tang dynasty, Wu Zhao, her given name, was the daughter of a relatively affluent family. Her father was a timber merchant who somehow managed to get an in with the imperial court. Social climbing was already a thing, folks. By the time she was 14, Wu was sent to the palace of Emperor Taizong as a concubine. Now, before you start imagining this as a Cinderella story, remember that the palace was less fairy tale and more Game of Thrones, with better architecture. Concubines in the imperial court were ranked lower than the emperor's wife, but their influence could rival that of any modern-day lobbyist. Wu was just one of many, but she was determined not to be just another pretty face in a sea of competition. She had ambition and a keen understanding of human nature, and let's face it, she was practically Machiavelli with a hairpin. During her time as one of 28 concubines, Wu wasn't just sitting around embroidering peonies. She was listening, learning, and preparing for her next move. Her intelligence caught the attention of Emperor Taizong, who reportedly trusted her enough to have her assist with some of his paperwork. Yes, you heard that right. Medieval secretarial duties were the stepping stones to power. But alas, Taizong died in 649 AD, and Wu was sent to a Buddhist nunnery, in line with the tradition of exiling the late emperor's concubines to a life of prayer and obscurity. Here's where things took a decidedly soap opera turn. The new emperor, Gaozong, was none other than Taizong's son, and as luck or fate or Wu's own charm would have it, she and Gaozong had already developed a bit of a spark, while dear old dad was still on the throne. As soon as Gaozong ascended, Wu found herself back at court, this time as a favored concubine. This was a strategic comeback worthy of a standing ovation. Now, you might think the story would mellow out, but remember, this is Imperial China we're talking about. Mellow isn't in the vocabulary. Wu wasn't just content with her new position. She was eyeing the role of Empress Consort, a position held at the time by Empress Wang. And here's where Wu's story gets a bit dark. History suggests that Wu orchestrated the downfall of Empress Wang through a series of cunning moves that would make Lady Macbeth look like an amateur. Rumors flew. Some say she framed Empress Wang for the death of Wu's own infant daughter, a claim that's as plausible as it is chilling. However, the truth is murky, and it's worth noting that history often paints ambitious women with a particularly villainous brush. What's undeniable is that by 655 AD, Wu had successfully supplanted Wang and become Empress Consort. She had climbed the ladder not just by playing the game, but by rewriting the rules entirely. So, what made Wu Zetian such a compelling figure? For one, she navigated a patriarchal society with a level of political savvy that would flummox many of her male counterparts. The Tang dynasty was a time of cultural flourishing, Silk Road trade, Buddhist art, and poetry that could move even the most stoic Confucian scholar. But it was also a time when women were expected to be seen and not heard. Wu shattered that mold with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Her rise to power serves as a testament to her intelligence, charisma, and sheer determination. Wu Zetian understood the intricacies of court life, the value of alliances, and perhaps most importantly, the art of public relations. She knew when to charm, when to intimidate, and when to act. Her story may be peppered with controversy and a pinch of scandal, but it's also one of resilience and tenacity. As we close this chapter on Wu Zetian's early years, consider this. How many historical figures have had their legacies tainted by those they outsmarted? Wu's story is a reminder that history is often written by the victors, and those who are victorious in a male-dominated world often face a harsher judgment. Stay tuned as we delve further into the life of the woman who dared to claim the dragon throne for herself. Wu Zetian's ascent from consort to empress was just the opening act in a drama that Shakespeare would have struggled to script. With her new title came unparalleled influence, and Wu Zetian wasn't about to play second fiddle to anyone, not even the emperor. She turned her sights on reforming the Tang dynasty, wielding her power as if it were an artist's brush on a vast political canvas. But her methods, let's just say they were less Barb Ross and more Game of Thrones, with a side of Machiavellian flair. Once Wu Zetian became Empress consort, she wasted no time in proving that she was not just a pretty face in the palace. Her first order of business: overhaul the bureaucracy, which was about as bloated as a Tang dynasty banquet. Wu introduced a series of reforms aimed at rooting out corruption and establishing meritocracy, concepts that, in a world of inherited power, were as revolutionary as sliced bread. She expanded the imperial examination system, ensuring that positions were filled by people who actually knew what they were doing. Imagine competency in government. What a novel idea. But Wu wasn't all about the carrot. She had a hefty supply of sticks. Enter the iron hand of justice, a phrase that's part legend, part historical fact, and entirely fearsome. Wu Zetian's justice system was notorious for its severity, earning her a reputation that still raises eyebrows. Tales of her ruthless methods circulated like medieval tabloid fodder. Officials vanishing overnight, mysterious deaths, and punishments that made Dante's Inferno look like a vacation brochure. But how much of this is true, and how much is the result of a bad medieval PR campaign? Let's start with the facts. Wu Zetian did establish a secret police force, a move as popular as a tax audit, but necessary in her eyes to maintain control. The state security apparatus she built was designed to sniff out treason and corruption, and it was remarkably effective. During her reign, Wu reportedly reduced the number of executions, though perhaps not in the way you'd think. She preferred exile as a punishment, a more economical choice than the traditional beheading, which, let's face it, doesn't exactly lend itself to rehabilitation. And then there's the infamous story of the human pig, a particularly gruesome punishment allegedly meted out by Wu. According to legend, she ordered one of her enemies to have their limbs and tongue removed, effectively turning them into a speechless, crawling creature. This tale, while spine-chilling, lacks solid historical evidence and is likely the product of historical embellishment. After all, nothing sells a story like a dash of the macabre. Despite the whispers of her brutality, Wu Zetian's reforms had tangible benefits. She bolstered the economy by reducing taxes on farmers, which, in a land where agriculture was the backbone, was a move worthy of a Nobel Prize in economics, if such a thing existed back then. Her policies encouraged agricultural innovation and production, stabilizing food supply and boosting trade along the Silk Road. Under her rule, the Tang dynasty saw increased wealth and a vibrant cultural exchange, as goods and ideas flowed like the Yangtze. Wu's political acumen also extended to religious affairs. A devout Buddhist, she leveraged her faith to consolidate power. She commissioned grandiose projects like the Longmen Grottos, peppering them with sculptures and inscriptions that highlighted her divine right to rule. This was political theater at its best, a combination of faith and propaganda that kept the populace both pious and pliant. But let's not forget the elephant, or should we say dragon, in the room: Wu Zetian's gender. Her reign was a bold statement in a male-dominated society, and her very existence as an empress regnant was a thumb in the eye of patriarchal norms. Her critics, both contemporaneous and posthumous, often used her gender to vilify her, portraying her as a power-hungry seductress rather than a strategic leader. The double standard is as glaring as the midday sun, but it highlights the complexity of her legacy. The narratives about Wu Zetian are as varied as they are vivid. She is either the embodiment of ruthless ambition or a savvy stateswoman who knew how to play the game better than anyone else. The truth, as with most historical figures, lies somewhere in the middle. She was a product of her time, navigating a treacherous landscape where power was both a blessing and a curse. As we wrap up this chapter on Wu Zetian's rise to Empress, it's clear that her reign was far from ordinary. She defied conventions, implemented reforms that shaped the future of China, and ruled with a mix of fear and admiration. Whether you see her as a tyrant or a trailblazer, there's no denying her impact. In a world that often tried to silence women, Wu Zetian's voice echoed across the centuries. Stay tuned as we continue to explore the life of this extraordinary ruler and the legacy she left behind. While Wu Zetian's rise to Empress was nothing short of a political masterclass, her reign as the sole female emperor of China was where her true prowess came to light. Picture a world where your every move is scrutinized, your every decision questioned, not least because of your gender. Yet Wu wasn't about to let societal norms dictate her legacy. She had a vision for the Tang dynasty that was as ambitious as it was transformative. Cue the civil service exams, which she expanded with the enthusiasm of a kid in a candy shop. Except this candy was a meritocratic bureaucracy. The civil service exams were Wu's not-so-secret weapon in ensuring that the most skilled individuals, rather than the most well-connected, ran the administration. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a talent show, minus the stage fright. The exams tested candidates on Confucian classics, poetry, and legal knowledge, which meant you had to be a literary ninja to even stand a chance. Wu's decision to broaden these exams was revolutionary, aiming to create a government based on merit rather than nepotism. By the time Wu was done, the number of exam takers had skyrocketed, with over 30,000 hopefuls vying for positions annually. It was a bureaucratic shake-up that reshaped the very fabric of Chinese governance. But Wu Zetian's reforms didn't stop at exams. Oh no, she was just getting warmed up. Her reign saw the rise of Buddhism as a state religion, a strategic move that was part spiritual patronage, part political chess. By promoting Buddhism, Wu not only solidified her divine right to rule, but also distanced herself from the Confucian scholars who were less than thrilled about a woman in power. She wasn't just promoting a religion, she was crafting a narrative, one where the emperor was a Buddhist sage, a ruler who wielded both spiritual and temporal power with a deft hand. Wu commissioned the construction of temples and monasteries that would make the Vatican blush. Among them was the Daean Temple, a massive complex that wasn't just a place of worship, but a symbol of her reign. The temple's grandeur was a testament to her commitment, with gilded statues and elaborate frescoes that told stories of Buddhist deities, and of course, the enlightened emperor herself. The expense of such projects was significant, but Wu knew that investing in religion was a way to cement her legacy and ensure her name echoed through the ages. Her relationship with Buddhism was as much about politics as it was about piety. Wu strategically placed Buddhist monks in key advisory positions, a move that would be akin to having your spiritual advisor double as your chief of staff. These monks were not only spiritual guides, but also political allies, helping to legitimize her rule and keep the Confucian critics at bay. Remember the infamous stone tablet at the Qianling Mausoleum, inscribed with praises of Wu's reign. That was no accident. It was a carefully crafted piece of propaganda designed to underscore her divine mandate. Yet, for all her grand projects and religious patronage, Wu's reign was not without its controversies. Her policies were as polarizing as they were innovative, with critics accusing her of extravagance and despotism. The expansion of the civil service exams, while democratic in spirit, also meant that the aristocracy's grip on power was loosening, a reality that didn't sit well with the old guard. Wu's focus on meritocracy was seen as a threat to the status quo, turning the traditional hierarchy on its head and causing more than a few sleepless nights among the nobility. Moreover, her promotion of Buddhism wasn't universally popular. It diverted funds from Confucian institutions and sparked tensions with the traditionalists who viewed her as an upstart. The costs of her religious and architectural endeavors were immense, straining the empire's coffers and leading to increased taxes, something that never wins a ruler any popularity contests. Yet Wu was undeterred. She understood that lasting change was never easy, and she was willing to pay the price, both economically and politically. As Wu Zetian's reign continued, her grip on power became the stuff of legends, and not always the flattering kind. Stories of her ruthlessness circulated like wildfire, painting her as a tyrant who would stop at nothing to maintain control. Yet these tales must be taken with a grain of salt, as they were often penned by those who had the most to lose from her reforms. Was Wu's rule marked by a certain iron-fisted approach? Absolutely. Or was she the bloodthirsty despot her enemies claimed? The truth likely lies somewhere between the extremes. In the end, Wu Zetian's reign was a study in contrasts. She was both a visionary ruler and a controversial figure, a trailblazer who defied the gender norms of her time. Her innovations helped to define the Tang dynasty, leaving a legacy that was as complex as it was enduring. Whether you see her as a ruthless power player or a pioneering leader, there's no denying that Wu Zetian changed the course of Chinese history. As we leave this chapter of Wu Zetian's reign, remember that the story is far from over. The challenges she faced, the enemies she made, and the empire she built all set the stage for the next act in this historical drama. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the life of a woman who dared to rule in a world that wasn't ready for her. Just as Wu Zetian was hitting her stride and building an empire that would make even the most ambitious Roman emperor envious, the political winds began to shift with the subtlety of a hurricane. You see, being at the top is a precarious position, and for Wu, the higher you climbed, the more people there were trying to yank you down. Not that she hadn't been expecting it. After all, palace intrigue was practically a national sport in the Tang dynasty. But what she might not have anticipated was the betrayal that would come from within her own family, the very people who should have been her staunchest allies. Let's dive into the thick of it, Wu Zetian's later years, where her grip on power began to loosen like an old sandal strap. By this time, we're talking the 690s, and our Empress was still a force to be reckoned with. But time, as they say, waits for no one. Not even for the first and only female emperor of China. Age crept in, and with it, the challenges of ruling an empire that spanned over 4 million square miles. Wu was in her 70s, an impressive feat considering the average life expectancy back then hovered around the late 30s. Yet, as her physical strength waned, so did her ability to fend off the ambitious vultures circling her throne. Her sons. Oh, her sons. If you thought your family gatherings were awkward, imagine dealing with offspring who were less apple of the eye and more thorn in the side. Wu's sons, Zetian and Dan, were eager to ascend the throne. It's a classic case of the apple not falling far from the tree, except in this scenario, the apple was actively trying to uproot the tree. The two were embroiled in a power struggle that would make any soap opera plot seem tame by comparison. Let's focus on Zetian, the elder son. Initially, he was the crown prince, a title that sounds glamorous but is about as secure as balancing on a seesaw. His relationship with Wu was strained. Think of it as a medieval version of Mommy Dearest, but with imperial robes. In a palace where trust was rarer than a unicorn sighting, Zetian was accused of plotting against Wu, and in true Tang dynasty fashion, he was exiled. Again. This wasn't his first trip to the political wilderness, mind you. He'd been exiled before, reinstated, and then exiled again. It's the ancient equivalent of being put in and out of the naughty corner. Dan, the other apple, played his cards a bit closer to the vest. While his brother was making waves, Dan was more like a quiet pond. But don't let the calm waters fool you. He had ambitions of his own and allies waiting in the wings. The family dynamics were less Brady Bunch and more succession, with everyone eyeing the throne like it was the last slice of pizza at a family dinner. The real kicker in Wu Zetian's downfall came from a clique of cunning courtiers and officials, known as the Zhang brothers, who had wormed their way into her inner circle. Zhang Yizhai and Zhang Changzong were supposedly handsome and charming, the kind of men who could sell sand in the desert. They provided Wu with companionship, flattery, and the occasional bad advice, like the sort of friends who tell you that a mullet is a great hairstyle choice. Their influence over Wu was resented by many at court. These brothers were the ancient equivalent of influencers, wielding power far beyond their official titles. They were given fancy titles and lands, which naturally made them about as popular as a tax collector during a famine. The court was rife with rumors about their relationship with the Empress. Were they simply close confidants, Or was there something more scandalous going on? The whispers grew louder, and before long, the Zhang brothers became a lightning rod for those looking to weaken Wu's reign. It all came to a head in 705 AD, when the palace coup was orchestrated with the precision of a Swiss watch. The coup was led by Zhang Jianji, a high-ranking official who had clearly had enough of the brothers' antics. This wasn't a spontaneous revolt. It was a well-planned operation, more Ocean's 11 than Les Miserables. In one fell swoop, the Zhang brothers were executed, their titles stripped faster than you can say imperial decree. With the Zhang brothers out of the picture, Wu Zetian found herself cornered, her political support crumbling like an overbaked biscuit. Facing mounting pressure and the realization that holding onto power was becoming as futile as catching smoke with your bare hands, Wu made the decision to abdicate. At the ripe old age of 81, she stepped down, marking the end of her tumultuous reign. But here's the kicker. As soon as she was out of the picture, efforts to erase her legacy began with a vengeance. Her successors, eager to restore the Tang dynasty's male-dominated status quo, embarked on a campaign to scrub her from the history books. Statues were defaced, inscriptions erased, and her accomplishments downplayed or attributed to her male predecessors. It was a historical whitewashing that would make even the most zealous revisionist historians blush. Yet, despite these attempts to obliterate her memory, Wu Zetian's story proved too compelling to be entirely forgotten. The infamous ladies-in-waiting incident offers a glimpse into her personal life, a humorous anecdote amid the political turbulence. According to legend, Wu had a penchant for surrounding herself with a coterie of young, attractive ladies-in-waiting. But these weren't just any attendants. They were carefully chosen for their intelligence and charm, serving as her confidantes and spies. Imagine a secret service team that doubled as a book club. One particularly amusing story involves Wu allegedly disguising one of her ladies-in-waiting as a man to test her minister's loyalty. Talk about a job interview that would make even the most seasoned HR manager sweat. The ruse worked, revealing those who were more interested in currying favor than in honest service. It's a tale that underscores Wu's knack for turning even the most mundane court rituals into a strategic advantage. As we leave this chapter, Wu Zetian's legacy is both monumental and enigmatic. Her reign may have ended, but her impact on Chinese history endures, a testament to her intelligence, ambition, and resilience. Her story is a reminder that power, once seized, is never easily relinquished, and that those who dare to defy convention often leave a mark that no amount of historical revisionism can fully erase. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the life of this extraordinary ruler and explore the legacy she left behind. And so, as Wu Zetian's story draws to a close, her legacy looms as large and complex as the empire she once ruled. It's a legacy that's not just etched in stone or ink, though, heaven knows, plenty of both were used in her honor, but in the societal shifts that rippled through China long after her abdication. Despite the best efforts of her successors to bury her contributions under a mountain of patriarchal revisionism, Wu's impact was too monumental to be swept aside like a footnote in a dusty annal. Let's unpack what Wu left behind. First off, her promotion of Buddhism as a state religion. This wasn't just a nod to the spiritual, but a masterstroke of political maneuvering. By elevating Buddhism, she created a religious counterweight to the Confucian scholars who'd been sharpening their quills against her from the start. Buddhism flourished under her reign, leaving a cultural and architectural legacy that would endure for generations. Longmen grottos and their intricate carvings. Think of them as the ultimate art installation, a testament to Wu's reign that no amount of historical whitewashing could erase. Economically, Wu Zetian's reign wasn't just a tale of temples and tablets. Her tax reforms, which, let's face it, were about as popular as a root canal, actually laid the groundwork for a more equitable system. By reducing the burden on farmers, she ensured a more stable agricultural base, which was the economic backbone of the empire. More food production meant more trade, and more trade meant more money flowing into the imperial coffers. It's the kind of fiscal policy that would make even modern-day economists nod in approval, assuming they could look past the whole secret police thing. Now, onto her social reforms. If there's one thing Wu understood, it was the power of education. Her expansion of the civil service, exams democratized the bureaucracy, pulling talent from all corners of the empire, not just the aristocratic elite. The exams went from being a rarefied rite of passage to a bustling meritocratic marketplace, with over 30,000 candidates competing annually. This was no small feat. It was the ancient world's version of the American dream, if your dream involved reciting Confucian classics under the watchful eye of imperial examiners. But let's not sugarcoat it. Wu's reign wasn't all enlightenment and economic savvy. Her methods were as controversial as they were effective, a blend of carrot and stick that sometimes leaned heavily on the stick. Her secret police and the infamous tales of a harsh justice system have left a lasting impression, too, casting a long shadow over her achievements. Was she a tyrant? To some, undoubtedly, but to others, she was a necessary force of change in an era that was as resistant to innovation as it was to female authority. So, how does one reconcile these dual narratives? In the end, Wu Zetian might best be understood as a paradox, a ruler who wielded power to both create and destroy. Her story is a cautionary tale of ambition and the price one pays for defying societal norms. Yet, it's also an inspiring saga of resilience, a testament to what one woman could achieve in a world determined to silence her. Fast forward to today, and Wu's legend remains as captivating as ever. Historians and pop culture aficionados alike are drawn to her story, not just for its dramatic twists and turns, but for the questions it raises about leadership, gender, and legacy. She's a staple in Chinese historical dramas, where she's often portrayed as either a ruthless villain or a visionary hero, sometimes within the same series. Her life has inspired novels, films, and television shows, each interpretation adding layers to her enigmatic persona. In recent years, there's been a shift towards a more nuanced view of Wu Zetian, one that balances her accomplishments with her authoritarian tendencies. She's celebrated for her strategic brilliance while scrutinized for her heavy-handed rule. This modern reinterpretation is not just a reflection of changing societal attitudes towards women in power, but also an acknowledgement of the complexities of leadership itself. As we wrap up this deep dive into Wu Zetian's legacy, it's clear that she was both a product of her time and a force that transcended it. Her audacity to claim the dragon throne was nothing short of revolutionary, and her reign, brimming with reforms and controversies, offers a rich tapestry of lessons and legacies. Whether history remembers her as a tyrant or a trailblazer, one thing is certain. Wu Zetian dared to dream, to rule, and to leave an indelible mark on the story of China. In the end, Wu's life reminds us that history is not just a series of events, but a complex interplay of personalities and possibilities. Her story invites us to question our assumptions, challenge our narratives, and perhaps, most importantly, to remember that the stories we tell are as much about us as they are about those who live them. So next time you hear her name, remember that behind the myths and the legends was a woman who refused to be relegated to the sidelines. A woman who, against all odds, became a ruler in her own right. And that, dear listeners, is a tale worth telling. In a world where gods supposedly roamed the earth like they owned the place, because, well, they kind of did, you'd find the ancient Greeks, a people with a penchant for drama that would make a soap opera look like a weather report. Now, let's talk about these folks who gave us the Olympic Games, democracy, and a mythology that reads like the most chaotic family reunion. The ancient Greeks were a civilization that thrived around the shores of the Mediterranean Sea from roughly 800 BC to 146 BC. But let's not get bogged down in timelines. Let's focus on what really matters, their gods and the juicy stories that spun around them. The Greeks had a flair for the dramatic, and their religious beliefs were no exception. Their gods weren't distant, aloof deities sitting on clouds. Nah, these were gods who got down and dirty with the mortals, constantly meddling in human affairs like divine helicopter parents. At the heart of this cosmic soap opera was Mount Olympus, the supposed home of the 12 Olympians. Think of them as the original A-list celebrities of the ancient world, complete with scandals and complicated relationships. Leading this divine entourage was Zeus, the king of the gods, who wielded thunderbolts like a kid let loose with a Nerf gun. Zeus was a character straight out of a reality TV show, charismatic, powerful, and with a personal life messier than a teenager's bedroom. He was married to Hera, the goddess of marriage and family, which sounds sweet until you learn Zeus's favorite hobby was seduction. With a lineage that could rival the most elaborate family tree, Zeus fathered numerous children with various goddesses and mortal women. This didn't sit well with Hera, whose jealousy could have inspired 1,000 Greek tragedies. And perhaps it did. Take Heracles, for instance, known to us as Hercules, thanks to the Romans who loved a good rebranding. Born to Zeus and a mortal woman, Heracles was constantly tormented by Hera. In one of her legendary fits of rage, she sent snakes to kill him in his crib. Spoiler alert, Heracles survived. But it makes you wonder if the Greeks ever questioned why their gods, supposedly bastions of power and wisdom, acted like characters from a dysfunctional sitcom. So why did the Greeks create such an elaborate pantheon of gods, each with their own quirks and flaws? The answer might lie in their geographical and social landscape. Greece was a land of isolated city-states, each with its own government and culture. Religion was one of the few unifying forces, and these myths served as shared stories that connected disparate communities. Plus, they provided explanations for natural phenomena in a time when science was still a fledgling concept. Why does the sun rise? Because Apollo rides his chariot across the sky, obviously. It's important to note these stories weren't just bedtime tales to the Greeks. They took their religion seriously, building elaborate temples and hosting grand festivals in honor of the gods. Take the Parthenon in Athens, built in the 5th century BC as a temple to Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war. This architectural marvel wasn't just a place of worship. It was a statement of the city's wealth and power. And then there were the Olympic Games, held every 4 years in honor of Zeus. Athletes competed not just for glory, but for divine favor. Despite the seriousness with which they practiced their faith, the Greeks didn't necessarily see their myths as literal truth. Aristotle, one of the greatest philosophers of the ancient world, reportedly dismissed traditional myths as lies that served moral and educational purposes. This pragmatic approach suggests that while the Greeks enjoyed their stories, they also understood them as allegories for human experiences. After all, what better way to explore themes of love, jealousy, and power than through the antics of gods with very human-like flaws? At the end of the day, Greek mythology isn't just about the gods themselves. It's about what they represented. These stories offered a way for the Greeks to explore the complexities of human nature and the world around them. They were a reflection of a society that valued storytelling as a means of understanding life's mysteries. So, while it's easy to laugh at the absurdity of a god turning into a swan to seduce a mortal, yes, Zeus did that too, it's worth appreciating the deeper significance these myths held in the tapestry of Greek culture. Now, grab some popcorn and settle in, because this is just the beginning of our journey through the enthralling, occasionally baffling world of ancient Greek religion. Now, as we leave behind the divine soap opera of Mount Olympus and the intriguing personalities of its residents, let's dive into the nuts and bolts of how these myths weren't just spun for sheer entertainment, but were intricately woven into the socio-economic fabric of ancient Greece. Picture this: bustling markets, grand temples, and festivals that make your neighborhood block party look like a Tuesday afternoon siesta. Welcome to the ancient equivalent of Disneyland, where faith, commerce, and a dash of political maneuvering came together in an elaborate dance. First off, let's talk about temples. These weren't your average Sunday service spots. Nope, these were monumental structures, the architectural bling of their time, and the Greeks spared no expense. The Parthenon, a crown jewel of Athens, reportedly cost 469 silver talents to build, equivalent to well over $7 million today. But it wasn't just about splashing the cash to flaunt wealth. Temples were the beating hearts of city-states, doubling as banks, treasuries, and even tourist attractions. Pilgrims would travel miles, their sandaled feet shuffling along dusty roads, just to catch a glimpse of a magnificent statue of Athena or Poseidon. Every visit involved offerings, which often translated into economic gain for the locals. Think of it as the ancient world's version of buying a ticket to see a blockbuster movie, with some divine blessings thrown in as a bonus feature. And who ran these spiritual hotspots? Enter the priesthood, the ancient equivalent of your local tour guide, spiritual advisor, and sometimes political influencer. Serving in a temple was not just a religious duty, but a prestigious gig. Priests and priestesses wielded significant power, often acting as intermediaries between the gods and the people. They oversaw sacrifices, maintained the sacred spaces, and sometimes, if the gods were feeling particularly chatty, delivered oracles. Delphi, anyone. The priestess of Apollo, known as the Pythia, would deliver cryptic prophecies that could sway political decisions and military strategies, proof that even in ancient times, people would pay for a good horoscope. Now, speaking of sacrifices, this was no small affair. Forget tossing a coin in a fountain, we're talking livestock, sheep, goats, and even the occasional bull offered up to appease the gods. The ancient Greeks believed that these offerings maintained cosmic order and ensured prosperity. But here's the kicker. These sacrifices weren't just spiritual transactions. They were community events, complete with feasting and merrymaking. After the gods received their portion, usually the fat and bones, the rest was cooked up and shared among the people, fueling local economies and fostering communal bonds. The cost of these sacrifices could be hefty, with a single bull costing upwards of 120 drachmas, a small fortune for the average farmer. Yet this expenditure was seen as essential, a necessary investment in divine goodwill and social cohesion. As if that wasn't enough to keep the economic wheels turning, we have the grandest spectacle of all, the festivals. These multi-day extravaganzas were a mix of religious devotion, athletic competition, and pure revelry. The Panathenaic Festival of Athens, for example, was a week-long celebration in honor of Athena, featuring processions, sporting events, and musical contests, all culminating in a massive sacrificial feast. The economic impact of such festivals was significant. Vendors, artisans, and performers flocked to these events, creating a temporary boost in trade and employment. It was like the Super Bowl, Mardi Gras, and a county fair rolled into one, complete with its own economic ripple effect. But Greek mythology wasn't just an economic engine. It was a tool of social and political influence. These myths were more than just entertaining tales. They were stories with a purpose. Take the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur. On the surface, it's a thrilling adventure of bravery and cunning. Dig a little deeper, and you see it as political propaganda. Theseus, the hero who defeats the beast, becomes a symbol of Athenian might and ingenuity. It's no coincidence that this myth gained popularity during Athens' rise as a major power. Similarly, the stories of Heracles, who performed his famous 12 labors, served as moral lessons. His exploits were celebrated as examples of strength, perseverance, and cleverness, qualities that resonated deeply with the Greek ideals of arete, or excellence. In essence, Greek mythology was a multifaceted beast, part spiritual guide, part economic powerhouse, and part political tool. It was a reflection of a society that understood the power of storytelling, both as a means of explaining the world and as a mechanism for shaping it. So, while the tales of gods and heroes entertained and inspired, they also served as a reflection of the values, fears, and aspirations of the people who told them. And just like that, the myths became an integral part of the Greek identity, woven into the very fabric of their daily lives. As we continue this journey through the mythological landscape, remember that these stories, as fantastical as they seem, were grounded in the reality of human experience. They were a means of exploring the complexities of life, of grappling with the unknown and the unknowable. So next time you hear a tale of Zeus transforming into a bull or Apollo chasing Daphne, know that you're not just hearing a story. You're catching a glimpse into the heart of a civilization that used myths to make sense of their world, and to navigate the intricate dance of faith, economy, and power. And with that, let's pause and prepare for the next chapter of this epic saga, where we'll peel back even more layers of ancient Greek beliefs and explore the profound impact these myths had on the world stage. Stay tuned. As we get ready to delve into the darker alleys of Greek mythology, remember that the Greeks weren't just spinning tales of mighty gods and epic heroes to pass the time. These stories are like ancient mirrors reflecting the fears, hopes, and existential dread lurking in the human psyche. And nowhere is this more evident than in the tragedies of Oedipus and Prometheus, where it turns out the gods were about as predictable as a cat on catnip. Let's start with Oedipus, the poster boy for just when you think things can't get worse. King of Thebes, solver of riddles, and unknowingly a guy with a seriously messed up family tree. His tale is the ultimate Greek tragedy, a narrative that begins with him heroically defeating the Sphinx, but ends with him poking out his own eyes. Talk about a plot twist. So, why did this tale resonate so deeply with the Greeks? Because it's a story about fate, one of the Greeks' favorite topics, second only perhaps to wine. In Oedipus's world, destiny is less of a gentle guiding hand and more of a relentless steamroller, despite his best attempts to dodge his fate, killing his father and marrying his mother. It turns out he's got as much chance of escape as a snail at a salt convention. The Greeks loved a good fate versus free will showdown, and Oedipus was the ultimate cautionary tale. It reminded them that no matter how clever or noble you were, the gods had the last laugh. The Greeks weren't masochists. They just understood that life could turn on you faster than you could say. Tragic irony. Now, onto Prometheus, the original fire starter who dared to defy Zeus. Prometheus's story isn't just a tale of rebellion. It's an ancient protest anthem. Here's a guy who stole fire from the gods to give it to humanity, effectively saying, hey, maybe mortals deserve a break. Did Zeus appreciate this act of charity? Not so much. As punishment, Prometheus was chained to a rock where an eagle would snack on his liver every day. And thanks to his immortality, this was a never-ending buffet of agony. Prometheus's plight resonated with the Greeks because it was a story of defiance and suffering for the greater good, a concept that was both terrifying and inspiring. For the Greeks, Prometheus was a symbol of human suffering and resilience. He was the ultimate rebel with a cause, embodying the idea that knowledge and progress often come at a steep price. This tale of sacrifice and rebellion spoke to the Greeks' own struggles against the whims of the gods and the harsh realities of life. It was a reminder that while the cosmos might be stacked against you, standing up for your beliefs was worth every bite of eagle-induced pain. But these myths weren't just philosophical musings. They were deeply rooted in the Greeks' everyday lives. The tale of Oedipus, for instance, was more than just a horror story about family drama. It served as a stark reminder of the importance of knowing one's place in the cosmic order. By acknowledging the limits of human control, the Greeks found a sort of cathartic release. It was like therapy with a lot more drama and a lot fewer couches. Prometheus's tale, meanwhile, echoed the struggles of those pushing against societal norms. In a world where innovation and change were often met with resistance, Prometheus was a beacon for those who dared to challenge the status quo. The economic and political structures of the time were rigid, and stories like these gave the Greeks a narrative framework to explore ideas of rebellion and its consequences without risking a divine smackdown themselves. These myths weren't just entertainment. They were complex narratives that reflected the human condition. They explored themes of power, defiance, and the often cruel randomness of fate. They provided a way for the Greeks to grapple with the chaos of their world, offering both a warning and a weirdly comforting reminder that they weren't alone in their struggles. The gods might have been capricious and often downright cruel, but in these stories, the Greeks found a shared understanding of what it meant to be human. As we peel back these layers of myth and meaning, it becomes clear that the Greeks were using these stories to navigate the unpredictable seas of life. They were grappling with questions about destiny, morality, and the inherent chaos of existence. And in doing so, they left us with a legacy of tales that continue to resonate, reminding us that, in the grand theater of life, we're all just trying to make sense of the script. So, while Oedipus and Prometheus might not have had the happiest endings, their stories were far from pointless. They were reflections of a society wrestling with its own identity, trying to understand its place in the world. And as we move forward in our exploration of Greek mythology, keep in mind that these myths are more than just ancient tales. They're windows into the very soul of a civilization, each story a thread in the intricate tapestry of human experience. With that said, let's keep this journey rolling. There's plenty more to uncover in the fascinating world of Greek mythology, where the line between divine comedy and cosmic horror is as thin as a Greek column. Stay tuned as we dig deeper into the myths that shaped not just ancient Greece, but the entire Western world. As we delve deeper into the labyrinthine world of Greek mythology, let's hit pause on the gods' antics and focus on the human endeavor to preserve these capricious tales. Ever wonder how these myths, spun in an age when the quill was just a glint in the eye of history, have survived millennia? Well, buckle up, because we're diving into the world of bards, poets, and the age-old tradition of oral storytelling that kept these narratives alive long before papyrus, and ink took the stage. Imagine being in ancient Greece, where the art of storytelling was the Netflix of its day. With no screens or streaming services, entertainment came alive through the spoken word. Enter the bards, those traveling storytellers who were part historian, part entertainer, and part mythologist. These were the folks who could spin a yarn that would captivate an audience better than any season finale cliffhanger. One of the most legendary of these storytellers was Homer, who penned, or more accurately recited, epic poems like the Iliad and the Odyssey around the 8th century BC. Homer's works were like the Game of Thrones of antiquity, full of heroics, betrayals, and guards behaving badly. The Iliad, set during the Trojan War, and the Odyssey, chronicling Odysseus's long journey home, were not just stories but cultural cornerstones. Although the exact details of Homer's life remain as murky as a Greek oracle's prophecy, his influence is undeniable. These epics were passed down orally before eventually being committed to writing, preserving them for posterity in a world where memory was your best bet against time's erosion. And let's not forget Hesiod, another heavyweight in the ancient literary world. While Homer gave us epic narratives, Hesiod offered a different flavor of myth-making. His theogony and works and days provided a more structured cosmogony and practical wisdom. Hesiod's theogony is essentially the genealogy of the gods, a bit like a divine gossip column that lays out who begat whom, with a few cosmic battles thrown in for good measure. Meanwhile, Works and Days is a farmer's almanac with life advice, kind of like a self-help book with divine footnotes. So how did these stories stay intact through the ages? The answer lies in oral tradition, a system as old as storytelling itself. Before the alphabet was widely used, Greeks relied on this method to transmit their myths. Imagine a world where memory was your hard drive, and accuracy depended on the storyteller's skill more than a spell checker. This wasn't a game of telephone gone wrong. It was a finely tuned art form. Bards would memorize vast amounts of poetry, using meter and rhyme to aid their memory, ensuring that each performance hit all the right notes, literally. But let's not romanticize it too much. This wasn't an idyllic time when every bard was a Homer. The reality was that oral tradition was as much about survival as it was about art. Political upheavals and economic struggles meant that stories often needed to be adaptable, changing to fit the needs of the time or the preferences of the audience. As city-states like Athens rose to power, the myths could be tweaked to reflect political realities, much like a director's cut of a movie. Take the tale of Theseus, for instance. Originally just a local hero of Athens, his myth was expanded and glorified as Athens grew in power, turning him into a pan-Hellenic champion. This mythic makeover mirrored Athens' desire to position itself as a cultural and political leader. The stories weren't static. They were living documents, evolving with the tides of history. When the Greeks finally embraced writing, it was as if someone had invented the DVR for myths. Around the 6th century BC, writing began to flourish, and with it, the stories that had been passed down orally for generations were finally inked onto papyrus and carved into stone. This transition marked a significant shift. Myths could now be preserved with greater fidelity, and the written word offered a new level of permanence that oral tradition alone could never achieve. Yet even with the advent of writing, these myths weren't sheltered from the relentless march of history. The Greeks lived through tumultuous times, wars, invasions, and political changes that could have easily consigned these tales to the dustbin of history. But Greek mythology proved remarkably resilient. It wasn't just about the stories themselves, but also about their adaptability. As empires rose and fell, these myths were adapted, and absorbed by cultures far and wide. Consider the Romans, who were such big fans of Greek mythology that they essentially rebranded it with a Latin twist. Zeus became Jupiter, Hera morphed into Juno, and so on. It was like a mythological facelift that allowed these stories to thrive in the Roman world. And it didn't stop there. Greek myths influenced Renaissance art, Victorian literature, and even modern pop culture, proving that some stories are too epic to fade away quietly. In the grand tapestry of human history, Greek mythology is a thread that has been woven into countless cultures and texts. Its influence is like a mythological Midas touch, turning everything it graces into cultural gold. These stories have been retold, reimagined, and reinvented across the ages, from Shakespeare's plays to Hollywood blockbusters, showing that the Greeks didn't just create myths, they set the stage for a global storytelling tradition. As we continue our journey through the annals of Greek mythology, let's keep in mind that these stories are more than ancient relics. They are the echoes of a civilization that understood the power of narrative, the allure of the unknown, and the complexities of the human condition. And while we've only just scratched the surface, there's plenty more to uncover as we explore how these myths continue to evolve and impact the world long after the last oracle's prophecy faded into the ether. Stay tuned for more mythological marvels and historical hijinks. And there you have it, Greek mythology, a storytelling juggernaut that has survived the rise and fall of empires, the shifting sands of cultural tastes, and the advent of digital media. But before you think these tales are just dusty remnants of a bygone era, let's take a look at how they've been given a modern makeover, splashed across pages, screens, and stages worldwide. From Disney's charming reimagining of Hercules to the more intense narratives in comic book universes, Greek mythology has been recast and reshaped like a well-loved stage play, constantly finding new ways to entertain and enlighten us. Take the story of Hercules, for instance. Disney's 1997 animated film turned the tragic hero into a lovable underdog with a catchy soundtrack. Sure, the film took a few creative liberties. Okay, a lot. But it managed to capture the essence of Hercules' struggle against overwhelming odds, albeit with a much happier ending. And let's be honest, who wouldn't prefer a peppy musical number over the doom and gloom of ancient tragedies? Disney's version may strut around with charm and humor, but it still nods to the enduring appeal of a hero who defies destiny, reflecting our own hopes that we, too, can overcome life's Herculean challenges. Then there's the world of comic books, where Greek gods and heroes find themselves battling alongside, or against, superheroes. Marvel's Thor might have a Norse origin, but his universe is peppered with Greek mythology, from the enigmatic Eternals to the mighty Hercules himself, who occasionally pops up to trade blows and witticisms with Earth's mightiest heroes. Meanwhile, DC Comics has its own Olympian pantheon, with Wonder Woman serving as a bridge between the world of men and the gods. Here, Greek myths are given a new lease on life, their themes of power, betrayal, and redemption playing out in the colorful panels of comic book pages. It's a testament to the flexibility of these stories that they can be woven into the fabric of modern mythology, where superheroes are the new demigods of the digital age. But why do these ancient tales continue to resonate so strongly with us today? The answer lies in their exploration of universal human themes: love, power, betrayal, and the eternal struggle against fate. These stories delve into the complexities of human nature, offering insights that are as relevant now as they were thousands of years ago. In an age where we're constantly grappling with questions of morality, identity, and destiny, Greek mythology provides a mirror in which we can see both our virtues and our flaws reflected back at us. Moreover, the gods and heroes of Greek mythology are profoundly human in their imperfections, a fact that makes them endlessly relatable. Zeus might wield mighty thunderbolts, but he's also a walking cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and ego. Athena's wisdom is tempered by her occasional bouts of hubris, while Hera's jealousy serves as a reminder of the destructive power of envy. These larger-than-life characters are not so different from us, facing dilemmas and emotions that are all too familiar. Their stories remind us that even the mightiest fall, but also that they can rise again, a narrative as comforting as it is cautionary. It's no wonder, then, that these myths have been adapted not only in pop culture, but also in education and psychology. The works of Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell, for instance, delve into the archetypal motifs found in Greek mythology, examining how these patterns influence our collective unconscious. The hero's journey, a concept popularized by Campbell, draws heavily from the trials and tribulations faced by Greek heroes. In classrooms around the world, these myths are taught not just as historical artifacts, but as windows into the human psyche, offering lessons on resilience, morality, and the timeless dance between destiny and free will. And let's not forget their influence on literature and the arts. From Milton's Paradise Lost, echoing the grandeur of epic battles between gods and titans, to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, a modern Prometheus tale exploring the consequences of playing God. Greek mythology has been a wellspring of inspiration for countless creators. Even contemporary authors like Rick Riordan have tapped into these stories, crafting new adventures for young readers that blend ancient myth with modern life. The continued popularity of these works underscores the lasting impact of Greek mythology, proving that even in today's fast-paced world, there's still room for stories that challenge us to ponder the deeper questions of existence. So, as we wrap up our exploration of the ancient Greeks and their mythological marvels, it's clear that these tales are more than just relics of the past. They're living narratives that continue to evolve, adapt, and inspire. They remind us that while technology and society may change, the core of our human experience remains the same. Love, fear, ambition, and the quest for meaning are as relevant now as they were in the days of Homer and Hesiod. In a world that often feels as unpredictable as a Greek tragedy, these myths offer both a refuge and a challenge, a chance to escape into fantastical realms while also confronting the very real dilemmas we face. They encourage us to dream, to question, and to seek out the heroes within ourselves, even when the odds seem insurmountable. And in doing so, they forge a bridge between the past and the present, reminding us that we are all part of a grand, ongoing story, one that began long ago on the sun-drenched shores of the Aegean Sea. So, whether you're a fan of Hercules' animated antics, a comic book aficionado, or just someone navigating the twists and turns of life, Greek mythology offers something for everyone. It's a testament to the enduring power of storytelling that these ancient tales continue to captivate and inspire, proving that while the gods may have left Olympus, their stories remain very much alive. And as we look to the future, one thing is certain: the myths will continue to evolve, reflecting the ever-changing tapestry of human culture. After all, in the grand theater of life, these stories are far from over. There are always new chapters waiting to be written, new heroes waiting to rise, and new lessons waiting to be learned. So here's to the myths, the legends, and the stories that continue to define us, reminding us that we are all, in our own way, part of something timeless and extraordinary.